Yes.
Right, I think we're just about there. A couple of minutes late, but I think that's because we've had, well, I can only speak personally, we've had an absolutely fascinating visit and so many interesting conversations. I think we probably cut it a bit fine, and there were 4 of us. I don't know whether other people have got similar stories, but welcome to this part of the meeting, and we'll go straight into the feedback. The first people on my list, I'm checking out whether this is actually the way it worked, because there's always some adjustment around the edges. James, Blythe and Jenny allegedly went to the Neuro Day unit. Did that happen? Jenny, are you feeding back?
Yes, we did indeed, and it was a very positive visit, and I think exemplified by Ramona, who was in charge. We spoke to the patients as well, and the atmosphere was warm and friendly, and that is very important for patients regularly attending for infusions and other activities. It is a very busy ward, even though it's only got 6 infusion bays and 4 beds. They can process between 40 and 50 patients a day, so that just goes to show the intensity of turnover. Overall, as I say, very well organised. To work there, you have to love an element of chaos, but they cope very well with that. In terms of, I think just in summary, we asked them really about the grit in the oyster, and there are a few issues which are important. So overall, extremely positive, but the 2 issues that came to the fore were that they're often asked to do at insufficient notice pre-op assessments for neurology patients who are awaiting surgery on that day. They should have been done in advance. A, that's an enormous time pressure on them in addition to other things, but B, they sometimes unearth things and means their operation is cancelled on the day. So that's not very good for resources. And then the second thing was these patients who are booked in a long time in advance for their infusions. They get as far as the ward, they sit and wait. The medication is on the ward, but they still have to wait sometimes for the signing, and that's a frustration. So they were the 2 process things which I think were important, but overall, congratulations to them.
Thank you very much indeed, Jenny. That's very good to hear. James, anything that you noticed that Jenny was busy doing something else at the point you noticed it?
No, we worked as a pretty good team, to be honest, and Jenny took all the notes. The only thing I'd add is with the patients in the Neuro Day units that were pre-op, having had no pre-op prior to coming in on the day, the unit opens to patients at 8, the list starts at 9. They are sometimes delaying the first patient on the list because they're not able to do everything, and there is also she said that from time to time there might be a patient who actually on the day turns out not to be fit, so they might lose a case, and it just struck me that there was probably something in terms of if that's the only pre-op they're having, it might be impacting on some of the neurotheatre's flow, but obviously we were only hearing it from the day unit perspective.
Thank you, James. Kate, I'm sure you were listening to all of that, and we'll pick up and see if there's anything that can be done to address those. Conscious that we often only get part of the story, but it's important that we follow up the part that we get. Lovely, thank you. So next on my list is Thurza and Martin in Cavell. I think this always sounds a bit like Cluedo, doesn't it? So was it Thurza and Martin?
Without the drain pipe.
Certainly without the drain pipe, or indeed any other implement. Martin?
Yeah, it was indeed. And for some time now, I've only ever had really positive visits. And I'm thinking, particularly from a public point of view, I can assure that if there was anything negative, we would say it as it was, but it was really quite heartening to meet people and hear the story. So, for example, when we asked about staffing, good staffing, no problems, asked about when you do need bank staff, they said the service is really good, they get us the people we need. We asked if there's things that they wanted us to say, and there are. For those closer to it, they're probably no surprise, and I suspect that they're very much national issues. But it's important that we tell it as we were told it. So Fiona the matron, we mostly met Fiona the matron and Jen the manager. And what they were saying was that with the increasingly ageing population, they have a higher proportion of patients who need one-to-one help. So a practical example would be there was a healthcare assistant sitting next to, not really appearing to do anything, but had to sit next to one of the patients because the concern was that because of delirium or dementia, that if the patient had a tendency to get up and then would probably fall, which, you know, apart from the caring aspect, is hardly in the hospital's interest in terms of extending the stay, etc. So it's necessary to do it, but what they were pointing out, and as an example today, there's 6 healthcare assistants, so that it looks right in terms of the staffing, but 3 of those have actually got to sit one-to-one with the other patients, and it's also difficult. They've now got them to wear red things because people thought they weren't doing anything, and so, you know, people come up and ask them to do stuff, etc. But they did say, and all credit to those whose work this was, they did say it had helped a lot that they now had mental health support workers. I think that's all I wanted to cover. I will hand over to Thurza.
Thank you, Martin. Thurza?
So I think the only other thing I'd pick up, which we were asked to feed back to the board, is the number of patients on the ward that actually it's not the best setting for them. So they showed us their whiteboard, and at least 3/4 of the patients on that ward didn't need to be there, that would be better in a community setting. And they talked about the difficulties that they had in terms of the liaison, the complex care packages, but it was quite marked when we met with the consultant and the nurse in charge that they felt that they could run a better unit, and it would be better for patients if some of those patients were receiving their care in the community. But the numbers were quite stark, and the length of time, so which was a sort of a norm, was that people who were fit for discharge in January are still waiting in March.
I think this is going to be a recurring theme, Thurza. We've found some similar instances on Florence Ward, which we'll report back on. And when we're talking about the future financial situation of the trusts and the system, this need to rebalance acute and community comes over, and social care comes over again and again and again. And until we crack it, we're going to continue with the problems that we've got, and it's bad for patients, and I'm absolutely clear about that. So thank you very much, Thurza and Martin. So the next group is actually the one that I was on, and it was quite a big group, which was probably quite intimidating to the poor folk that we suddenly landed on. There was Richard, Steve, Peter and myself, and we didn't actually agree who's going to feedback. Who's starting? Peter?
Yeah. Thanks, Shelley. Happy to. And it's Florence Nightingale is head and neck ENT, so about 22 beds, of which 7 are for tracheotomy patients. So quite a challenging ward. They've been, I think, mainly stepped down from after surgery. Most of them in a difficult way, unable to vocalise. So in the patient we met, her remarks had to be written down and shared with us that way. So really quite a challenging time. We met Carolina, who's the head nurse, been there 9 years, seemed generally happy with things. She stayed that time in quite challenging circumstances. Other staff we spoke to were positive. There was a good number, I think, of international nurses there who were kind of, in one sense, learning on the job, but were committed to doing the best possible job. So that I think was all positive. There was good support, I think, given the nature of the problems that people had from Macmillan and psychologists for people who maybe not going to be able to speak going forward, so needing mental support as well as nursing support directly. And so that was all good. Julian, you mentioned about the discharge challenge. I mean, partly because of the nature of the patients with their tracheotomies that would need minding once discharged, it was proving very difficult to move those patients into care homes or into support at home. So that's definitely a blockage there that if could be resolved would help them be able to manage in a better situation. I think the only other point, when we press, clearly it's a busy time generally, there's quite a lot of stress there, and at those times there may be the times at which patient care is at most under pressure, and I think we had one patient who suggested when things got really tough, sometimes generally good, but the care could suffer a little bit. And likewise with between the consultants and nursing staff, when the times get particularly under pressure, there can be strains there as well that hopefully don't impact on patient care, but nonetheless are a fact of life in terms of how they have to manage. So I think, Gillian, I'm sure you want to add to that from your discussion.
I'm going to see what Richard and Stephen have to say first. But I suspect, since I had one or two conversations that nobody else was party to, I will have to say something. Did you want to go first, Stephen? Richard?
Well, I'll be quite brief then. My overall impression was very positive. I thought that the people we met really knew what they were doing. I thought it was, we saw real evidence of good multidisciplinary working. We saw how medical care and social care can integrate. We heard about good quality end-of-life care. We heard about speech and language support for patients. We heard about psychologist support for patients. And I thought the ward looked well organised and well run. I think it's right that relationships can get a bit scratchy when things get really, really difficult and challenging. But I got the impression that the people that we spoke to were happy working there and had chosen to work there for a long time and felt they worked in a mutually supportive team. So overall, I felt it was positive.
Yeah, I was going to make a similar point. I mean, the length of stay of some of the members of staff was quite extensive. So the nurse in charge, as Peter said, 9 years. There was an HCA that had been on the ward 16 years. And, you know, that sort of loyalty to the ward sort of came through quite strongly, I think. I think the other thing, just picking up Peter's point about international nurses, you know, the one international nurse we spoke to commented on how well she'd felt supported and welcomed into the trust generally, and how it'd been a very positive experience. Had been a sort of cardiology experience in India before coming over, and since learned tracheostomies here, and was loving being on the ward. So I think it was very positive from that perspective.
Yeah. So just a couple of things for me. It felt like a very rich visit. We managed to talk to a lot of people. So just some themes that I think are worth reflecting on. We hear a lot about how the number of staff in the NHS has expanded without a commensurate increase in productivity. And Martin made the point about the number of people having to provide one-to-one care. And I spoke to an HCA on Florence who's been there for 20 years, so considerable loyalty to the trust. But she said there's 2 HCAs during the day, and if there is somebody requiring one-to-one care, which there's so often is, as patients are older, frailer, often with complex mental health needs. The person sits there all day looking after the person that they need to look after, and the other HCA is running around doing everything else for the other 21 patients. And she didn't complain, she just described it. And I thought to myself that when I sit there in those big national meetings being told about the need to get staffing numbers down, and I try and always explain that intellectually I understand that, and then there are these practical examples to do with mental health, to do with corridor care, to do with maternity, that actually push it in the other direction. Here was a very direct example of that, and Martin made the same point about his visit. So I wanted to pick up that theme. Second theme I wanted to pick up was about the balance of what happens in the community and what happens in acute. So I spoke to a very experienced nurse specialist who's been here a very long number of years, who is an expert on tracheotomies. And he made the point that he sits in meetings in the ICB talking about how if we could get a community tracheotomy service, that people wouldn't ping in and out of hospital. It'd be far better for patients and far cheaper for the system. And I thought to myself, and we've already heard some of that today, there is an example of the kind of challenges that we need to get to as a system. There is the answer to improved patient care and to cost effectiveness. And we feel miles from it, despite everybody understanding the problem and everybody's best intentions. And the third point, which I think is completely fresh, was about, I spoke to 2 medical students who were visiting the ward. And I wanted to say 2 things about that. First of all, they were in their first year and they were doing nursing duties. That is how they described it. And I thought and said to them, isn't that excellent? Because from the word go, it makes the point about medicine being a team sport. And so they were doing things that nurses normally do, and they completely understood that and wanted to do it. I thought that was so positive, and says something, I think, Jenny, about the quality of our medical education. But the second thing about my discussion with them is I asked them what they thought about the announcement that's been made in the last few days about the tie-up between St George's University and City. And they did know about it. They didn't know very much about it, and I'm not surprised. If you're a first-year medical student, I'm sure your priorities are elsewhere. So I said to them, would they like me to explain what I thought were the advantages of it? So I explained what I thought were the opportunities and invited them, if they ever had a different point of view, to drop me a note and tell me. But they were really interested to hear that, and I thought it was great that they were so open-minded and at the same time focused on what they were doing. So all in all, I think a great visit, really. So if we move on then to Jacqueline and Anne, who went to neuro-intensive care. Anne, I guess it's you rather than Jacqueline.
Well, shall I start?
Yes,
and then Jacqueline can join in. So as you say, we did go to neuro-intensive care unit, which, as it says on the tin, is very intensive. It's largely one-to-one care because of the nature of the conditions that people have. So people go in. It was actually, for me, surprisingly young patient cohort. They're not all older people, albeit that people come in as a result of strokes, trauma, bleeds, or whatever. We were very welcomed, albeit they didn't know we were coming, and I have a little bit of an issue with that. I wonder if it's a little bit disrespectful to turn up, on a very intensive ward without notice. But Shanika made the mistake of smiling at us when we entered, so we pounced on her. She'd been with us 10 years, very, very positive, very proficient, really enjoyed the team working. And Jacqueline asked about, the sort of disconnect between, you ask people, do they enjoy their job, and they're all really positive. And then when they fill in the staff survey, they say, everybody else is rubbish, and it's not quite what they say. But that disconnect between that loyalty to team and that, what do you think of the overall hospital? But very, very positive. A good story around people being retained there. And actually a focus on professional development, which I think is probably key to part of that. We did ask about the sort of the patient flow, and actually that was very good. The sort of the flow in and the flow out, those relationships worked really well. And I think that's probably in the nature of the specialist service that they offered. But it felt very calm, very professional. Looked to me to be, quite tight, but actually I was told that for an intensive care unit there was actually quite a lot of space. But I think that's the nature of the equipment there. We had a long chat with Marietta, who was in charge. My concern about us turning up unannounced was I think we were kind of getting in the way of her getting involved in team meetings and things like that. And in the end, we said, look, you do what you need. Let us not get in the way. But I guess 2 things. One thing that I, with my interest in mental health, was really interested in was the sort of ICU psychosis, is it? You know, the sort of the impact that it can have on people's mental health from spending a long time in ICU. And they did talk about a patient who'd been there 6 months, had 3 cardiac arrests, and actually had come back to see them because she'd gone back to work, and that really positive work was really important. But one of the things they talked about was creating a patient diary that they complete, because obviously there are gaps in somebody's memories of what's happened to them, and how important that was in terms of the recovery, not just for the patient, but perhaps for their family. So that felt like a really fantastic piece of work, and really important in terms of people's mental and physical well-being. They did, you know, I said, do you have enough resources? The answer was no. I thought that was quite interesting because there were a lot of people there, but it was very, very intense. The one thing when we said, what would you like us to bring back to the board, was car parking for staff. And Marietta has an idea, and I could understand the issue. What she was asking about was, how do we decide who gets a car permit? And if you're a member of staff who lives a long way away, could you take priority over somebody who could catch a bus or whatever? And she's got some thoughts about how that could be operated differently, and I think it would be quite good if somebody could follow that up with her. We didn't talk to patients because they were either sedated or sort of out cold, and I think that was the nature of the ward. But a really uplifting way to start the day. Have I missed anything?
No, the only one thing, I did ask whether did they have a high vacancy rate? No, they don't. And their turnover's low. That causes different problems, but they're pleased about that, but it does mean they lose some staff. And they train them very well. They get a lot of training, and that's a very positive thing. I think I go back to, there's a difference between having to do one-to-ones with patients on wards because of their either unwell or they wander or whatever the reasons are that we end up doing that. But I also think this conversation that Arlene and I are beginning to sort of unpick a bit, which is, what is it we're asking our nurses to do that means that they need more? Because actually, if we're asking them to do 50% of actually being on a computer, then actually we could do something about that. So we do need to do a bit of work. If we're really going to mean about not reducing care but getting on top of our costs, we really have to think about what is it we do differently, and what is it we work with them to do differently, so that it doesn't feel it's short-staffed, but they don't, and take away the non-value-added stuff. But I think that's early conversations we're having, isn't it, Arlene? And we need to flesh it out a bit more. But we won't be able to carry on unless we do something different, and that's the bit we need to get to.
So we can do different things perhaps in the hospital, but if we can recalibrate with the community, I think that's where the big prize is, because then we'll have less people on the wards. We won't have such a high occupancy rate, and that immediately gives staff more time, doesn't it? So great to hear that, another good visit. I thought it was interesting, Anne, that you made the point about unannounced and announced in visits. So Arlene and I have an ongoing debate about this, and I often feel I'm in the same place as you, but Arlene would properly say, and may want to, that the CQC don't announce they're coming, they just come. And our staff actually do have to be used to people just suddenly turning up. And so I think it's a fine balance, isn't it, Arlene? And it's an ongoing debate that Arlene and I are having on this matter. I'm sure she's heard what you had to say. And did you want to say anything at this stage, Arlene?
No, thanks, Julian, for highlighting. It is an ongoing discussion. I suppose it's what we want to use our pre-board visits for. But, you know, as Julian said, the CQC turned up this week. You know, I had half an hour to let staff know. And do we want to see it like the CQC will see it? We are not inspecting, but we can give feedback to help our staff prepare for that. Or do we just want to go and see what nurses can do overnight if you tell them? That's the big thing. If you give them if you give us advance notice, and I'm talking as a nurse, you will see the very best my ward has to offer.
We won't try and resolve it today.
But we can have that debate next week.
Yes, so I think you all know, because I did a note, I'm taking some time in the board development session next week for us to talk about CQC, and in particular, you know, I know I'm a broken record on this, but that we've got the board toward golden thread absolutely right, because I don't think we have yet. And that debate we've just had, no, well, not really debate, that highlight of some issues is a small part of it. So more of that next week. So next on my list is indeed Arlene with Yin and Andrew M. Did that happen? Yes. Yeah, and who's feeding back? Andrew.
I am, yes. So we visited the emergency department. Just to say, to start with, the emergency department had a visit by the CQC on Wednesday. So we were, and particularly Arlene, very thought it was very important to say thank you to staff for the way they engaged well with the CQC visit. It was actually quieter today in ED than it has been the last couple of days, so that was good. What we did was we followed the patient journey through, so we went outside and we walked in through the main entrance to sort of track the patient journey through the emergency department. So we went to check in and triage, so where patients get their initial couple of minutes triage. What was interesting there was there seemed very few options for the check-in triage people to actually be able to redirect the patients anywhere other than the emergency department. And they do sometimes have a navigator who can direct patients back, for example, to general practice, but they didn't have a navigator there today, and often they don't seem to have one. So it felt like there were some opportunities there to do some front door offloading of the emergency department that perhaps we're not taking advantage of. We then met with one of the nurses who does the initial workup on patients, and then we went through to Majors A. We met a few. We spoke to one of the doctors there, and there were a number of them clustered around. And the doctor we spoke to is actually working as a locum in the emergency department, and many of her colleagues had decided to do the same thing. So we said, well, what was it that made you decide to be a locum? And she said, well, it was the lack of flexibility, because I wanted to be able to teach, and I needed to study for my exams. And when I had a permanent contract, I couldn't do that. So I chose to be a locum to get more flexibility, and all my colleagues are in the same position. So we thought that was really pertinent. We visited Majors A, Majors B, and the resuscitation area. So just a couple of points. One is there were 32 patients waiting in the emergency department for a bed, so what we call DTA, so decision to admit but not yet found a bed. The longest had waited for over 30 hours. There weren't patients on the corridors at this point in time, but that was one of the things that they flagged up, was that often they do have to supervise patients in corridors, and it's difficult to keep them safe and give them the right level of care, and that's a real challenge. We were fortunate actually to coincide with the resuscitation safety huddle, so we joined that to listen in. It was well led, I would say. There was a lot of kind of good leadership and encouragement of staff in that context. We asked them what they felt the issues were. There were a couple of estates issues which they're hoping to get fixed today. Again, they talked about the issue of cohorting, and they felt that their perception was that there was often a delay in declaring beds. So they found that towards the end of their shift, suddenly you'd get 5 green ticks showing there were beds available, but by that stage it was difficult to make use of them because their own staff were about to go off shift, and they felt that it didn't always feel like everyone was working as a team across the trust, and it just felt like that was contributing to flow issues. That was their perception. So I know things are always more complicated than that, but clearly there was a perception that there were beds being held back that could have been made available earlier. They also talked about the issue of caring for patients with mental health needs in the emergency department, which we know is a hot issue. Interestingly enough, the nurses said that they had very brief training during their training on mental health, and they felt that if they had better training on mental health, they'd at least be able to manage the patients better. So that was interesting. I think that's all I've got to feedback. I mean, my overriding impression is we know it's a really difficult context. The flow issues are really obviously a big problem, but I was still struck by how dedicated all the people we spoke to were to providing the best care they could to patients. And there was some good leadership in evidence in the department.
That's very good to hear, Andrew. Thank you. Yin?
Just a couple of things to add to Andrew's really comprehensive update. So when we asked them what else we could do to feed back to the board, some of the doctors mentioned about the lack of IT and that they didn't have enough computers to be able to work on, especially in the afternoon. And I think Andrew's already mentioned about estate issues. There are sort of lighting issues in rooms 3 and 5. But otherwise, it was a very good visit, I thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Yin. Can I just check in with Arlene, Richard, then I'll come to you. Arlene?
Yeah, no, the only thing to add is we went to Majors B, which is where we had 2 incidents recently and where CQC spent a lot of time in their visit on Wednesday. And there is definitely something that we can do around how that area is staffed differently. And we've started that work or the discussions around that already. But we saw those patients and what that area looks like.
Helpful. Thank you, Arlene. Richard?
I just wanted to pick up on Andrew's important point about mental health, and I think that Arlene and I should probably outside this meeting pick up on the level of assurance we have that we're doing what we said we would do, because we have had a coroner's prevention of future deaths report reminding us how important it is to make sure that A&E staff are trained in recognising mental health problems. So we will pick that up. It may just be one person's perception, and more training is always good, but we'll pick up where the assurance is that we're doing what we should be doing.
That's helpful, Richard, thank you, because I had understood that one of the things we were doing with South West London St George's were actually better equipping our staff who, as you say, get very limited mental health training because that's not the area that they've chosen to go into. And certainly when I've spoken to staff in all 3 EDs, I've heard examples where staff have just felt their lack of training is bad for patients and bad for them as well. So Arlene wants to come in, and I think Anne does. We can't have a too big a discussion on a vital topic, but I do want to give Arlene an opportunity, and then Anne, and then go to the final visit. Arlene?
No, I just wanted to add, we also met the practice educator in ED who was telling us about the exchange program they have going with South West London and St George's, where we go over to them to deliver training on physical care, and they come over to us to do training for our ED staff on mental health. So we are doing some work. It is happening.
Yeah, I think the trouble often is that this can be quite anecdotal. You can get a false impression one way or the other sometimes, or a partial. Perhaps it's better to say a partial picture.
That was the only point that we're certainly at the Mental Health Trust very happy to help with training on mental health, and I'd understood that it was happening. Yeah.
That was my own understanding, because many of you know I've been most exercised about this, because when I hear it wasn't at George's, actually, it was at one of the other sites, that junior nurses feel frightened. That's just not an acceptable position as far as I'm concerned. So as usual, lots of rich material here. Final visit on my list was allegedly Derek, Kate and Angela went to medical physics. Is that true? Yes? Derek,
the allegation is true. Guilty as charged.
I'm back in Cluedo.
So I'll start off, is that all right? And, we went to medical physics. Medical physics, we were expected, I think. We were certainly met at the door. But medical physics has got a sort of central core, but a lot of different activities, and there are embedded activities. So there are technicians in renal, technicians in ITU who are specialists in those areas. We started off in one of the workshops where they do a lot of repair and maintenance. And in fact, I think I got the figure right, about 95-96% of our maintenance of equipment, repairing equipment, is all done in-house. We use very little in the way of contract work to do that. And I think that's a decision that was made some 10 or 15 years ago. There was a little plaque on the wall for 2006 where they'd won an award for saving us lots of money, which I thought was very nice. But we met Nazir Majood and Jonathan Silver. And I was very impressed with the grip they had. You know, you want a sense of, you know, we've got a grip on what we're doing, how we're doing it, where things are. They've got a barcoding system for the equipment. Everything gets coded when it comes in. And they've got a system that goes really from pre-procurement to end of life, including dispatching our equipment to an auction house, so we make money from equipment that we're discarding rather than having to paying someone to take it away. So I got the impression they had a good grip, financially conscious, and in fact we make money because we outsource our services to other hospitals, and we make was it 40k a year from that, something like that. So we make a certain amount of money. I did wonder if we could make more, because clearly a lot of in-house expertise, and the way they described it was seen as a centre of excellence and a centre for training. And I thought it was interesting with the merger with City, if I can get Jenny's attention for a second, because at least 3 of the engineers there were City graduates, and City run a course in medical physics and medical engineering. So I thought there's a great synergy there. I said, what difference does it make to you that we're next door to a university here? Well, virtually none at the moment, but I think the merger with City will create a synergy there. And we do postgraduate training because we're seen as a centre of excellence. So that I think is really positive, and I think we should do all we can to keep this in-house. 3 issues came up. We talked a bit about the merger across group. Epsom St Helier have about 12 staff, I think, that they count within medical physics, and we have about 80. So there's a very quite disparate, and I think Epsom St Helier, by virtue of their size and the fact that you can't get so much in-house expertise when you're a smaller unit, they use subcontracts a lot more. And I think they sort of warned us off not to expect quick wins from a merger, that this wouldn't save money in the short term. If they worked together as a single department, it would take some investment. They felt they would have to bring ESTH staff up to our standard, not in terms of quality of staff, but in terms of level of activity and involvement, because I think our staff, and James may want to come back on me on this, but our staff do a lot more, I think, in-house than ESTH do, simply because of the range of activities. When you've got 80 staff, you can have a lot of sub-specialisation. Space is a big issue. They do a lot of bed maintenance, so we don't have to send beds away to be fixed. And that's clearly a big issue. And we saw a lineup of beds that are triaged, so they're the ones that are really dead and are never going to come back, the ones that are resuscitatable, and the ones that don't need any treatment and just go down into a storeroom. But they're piled up lined up in a corridor in a plant room, basically, with lots of pipes, and it's all the heating pipes, and in summer it's almost unbearable to work, apparently. So they're trying to use a plant room corridor underneath the heating pipes as a workshop, and that's clearly I think in terms of health and safety at work, that might be an issue for us, because I'm not sure it's a safe working environment that we're asking them to work in. So I think we should flag that. And I think that does need some urgent attention. So the merger, the space issue, and then there was another issue that came up with Jonathan Silver was feeling quite passionate about, is that we've got a contract to use blood pressure machines from one particular company that, in their view, are unreliable and tend to fail after a couple of years. And so their procurement advice from a lot of in-house testing is that we use a different machine. But at the moment, they're being overridden by IT, this is just one side of the narrative, who insist that we buy a different machine because that's the one that works with Cerner. No, that's the one that Cerner prefer. They all work with Cerner because they have a common platform of intercommunication. And so I was feeling a bit aggrieved that IT have more of a voice about procurement of medical equipment than the experts in the field do. And he's trying to escalate that. So I think that's something to flag. So overall, really impressed with what they do. I think having this service in-house is great for us. It's great for patients. It's great for education. Good synergies with City going forward. And really commend what they do.
That's great, Derek. Thank you. I think you really brought it alive in a really interesting way. I'm sorry there's nobody here from Estates to pick
I like
up
devices. It's fun.
the quite important points you made. So can I just check with Kate and Angela whether there was anything they wanted to add, and then Jenny has indicated.
Just very quickly, because Derek's done a fantastic summary of the highs and lows, but they're a great team. I think we should be really proud of them. The only other thing, they talked about capital, because they've got a capital ask of around 20 million, but they're getting 800,000. So that's just for us to have in our heads around differential. However, I thought they were really positive and and thinking about ways that they manage that rather than moaning about it in terms of how they extend equipment and what else they can do around repairs. So they were quite sort of full of ideas, I thought, about how they overcome that. But it was a really good visit. And the first time I've been on that second floor, which is the service floor, is quite an extraordinary area, isn't it? Yeah.
Kate, would you mind talking to Jenny about some of the health and safety issues that...
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Jenny, I've agreed with Jenny, I'm going to feedback any estates issues with her after today. So yes, absolutely. I'll pick them all up.
Thank you very much. Angela, presume there's nothing you need to add, is there?
No, I mean, it was a really good visit, and they were very on top of what they were doing. So it was very, very enlightening. So, I think that they've really got a lot in hand. As Derek was saying, the space issues, I think, are the most difficult for them, and the working conditions around trying to repair things.
Thank you. So Jenny and Arlene both want to come in, and we've just about got a couple of minutes for that.
I don't know whether Arlene wants to come in about the clinical. I'm just going to clarify, because the word merger keeps being used in different contexts.
Yes.
So.
No, I just wanted to come in on the beds actually that Derek talked about, because I think one of the, I know the beds that you saw in the corridors, but just to give some context, from an infection control perspective, we saw the bed store in George's for the first time this week, and it's absolutely amazing, and to really jealous about the fact that we have that here, and we need to look and do something different for that in Excellence in Helier. But I think it's inevitable where some of the beds are stored, but just to know that they are, the process to get them clean and repaired is really good in George's.
Did we manage to do a video recording of that visit? I know we don't always, that comms turn up to do. You did? Great, because I think, when staff are doing such a fantastic job, I do want them to hear some of the praise that is articulated in the board. Jenny.
Thanks. I just think it'd be a good time for me just to describe what's happening in terms of the merger that's related to the university, because we talk a lot about merging our services and the clinical aspects, but just so people are aware that for nearly 2 years now we've been working towards a merger with City University of London. We're both University of London universities, and we strategically have agreed it's a good alignment, and we have worked up all the legals, all the financials and everything else around it. And we are at the stage now where we have signed what's called a transfer agreement, which is an engagement with strings. We are then going through a process up until hopefully August, where there is what we call the minimal amount of collaboration and joining together, and we're going to run as a joint new university called City St George's, again still part of the University of London. And so Derek mentioned the engineering. That's one of the complementary things, many complementary things about the alliance. Gillian, you mentioned students and their lack of knowledge of it, or the bottom line is our current students aren't particularly engaged with it because A, they don't read their emails, that's another thing, but B, in fact, we are very constrained with our current student cohorts by the Competition and Markets Authority. So please, if anybody hears from students that they're worried that they're going to have to go up to City to have their lectures or whatever, the Competition and Markets Authority makes it really clear that we have to give our students exactly the experience that they should expect, the quality that it is. And what we really want of people at the moment, because much of the day-to-day will remain the same, but project into the future about all the fantastic possibilities as a consequence of this move.
Thank you, Jenny. And I did use shorthand, but I did try and convey the fact that I had limited expectation that a couple of first-year medical students would be able to say very much about it, but they did know about it. They did know about it, and I thought that was a good thing. And they were very interested in my perception about the potential. But they did, interestingly, as you said, they did say, will we have to go there for our lectures? And I said, no. No, you won't. This is all about opportunity, not imposing things on you. So, Thank you, colleagues. I think that, as ever, has been a really great discussion. Lots of themes that I hope will inform the rest of the board meeting. And so now we will move seamlessly, if only a couple of minutes late, into the formal public agenda. So first of all, a big welcome to everybody, and a particular welcome to our governors, visitors, and Councillor McCabe from Merton Council, who's the cabinet member who looks after health. Very nice to see you all here this morning. I have apologies from Tim, who's basking in the sunshine in Barbados, and James.
Could we not have held the board meeting there?
And James Marsh, who's basking, I'm sure, in some sun somewhere, but I don't. He's in Sri Lanka, so there you go. We're a very cosmopolitan bunch. And otherwise, I believe we're all here. Any declarations of interest that need to be made? No? Okay, lovely. Can we agree the minutes of the last meeting? Thank you, Anne. Nobody else? Yeah, thank you, Derek. So they're agreed. Just before I get into the formal business about the action log and things, I wanted to say Happy International Women's Day. International Women's Day today. I think it's an important day in the calendar. Well, I would say that, I'm a woman, but I hope everybody thinks that as well. And I want to mention two particular women out of a very large number, obviously, in an organisation that employs thousands and thousands of women. I wanted to say a big thank you to Alicia, who is the current chair of the Women's Support Group in Georges, because she's done an amazing job for a number of years and she's standing down. And she's not somebody who ever seeks fame and fortune, but she really has done a good job, and I want to say a big thank you to Alicia. Some of you around the table know her, many of you won't. But I thought this was an opportunity on International Women's Day to do that. And the other woman who I particularly want to call out is Jenny Hyam, because Jenny has got a new job as Vice-Chancellor of the University of Suffolk. And many congratulations, Jenny. It's wonderful to see a woman who's got strong Georgia's connections, has led the university so well over a number of years, get a great job like this. And many congratulations from us all. And we'll be very sorry to see you move on, but we'll be delighted to see you move to that place. And I know it's a part of the world that's got particular connections for you. But I also wanted to say, Jenny did mention about the merger. Jenny has led the university through those 2 years that she described to something that I think is a real prize for both universities. And I look forward to the board being able, at an appropriate moment, probably in a board development session, to talk about some of the opportunities that presents to the trust. Because I know that City in particular are very excited about that. So you might say, well, what about all the other marvellous women in the trust? And there are countless. But I did today want to say thank you to Alicia, and many congratulations, and thank you to Jenny, though there will obviously be other opportunities in relation to Jenny. So that isn't on the agenda, but chairman's prerogative and all that jazz, I decided that's what I was going to do. So now we'll move on to the action log and matters arising. And if you turn to the action log, I don't think there's anything that we need to detain ourselves with today. There are clear mechanisms for everything on that log, unless anybody's got an alternative view. Andrew.
No, sorry, Gillian. I just wanted to go back to a matter arising from the minutes, because when I looked at the minutes, I noted the standing declaration of interest, and that non-executive directors who are appointed across both trusts have a standing declaration. And I think at the last meeting I was just a non-exec at George's. Since then I've been appointed to Epsom St Helier, so I guess I just wanted to note I've now got the same standing declaration of interest.
Thank you, Andrew. Well spotted. I should have done that, but that's an example of two brains are better than one. Thank you. So if we can note the action log and move on to the Group Chief Executive's report. Jacqueline.
So I also wanted to say Happy International Women's Day for all the women that we have across George's, Epsom and St Helier in our communities, wards, departments and round this table as well. And 72% of our staff are women. We make up the biggest part of the NHS, I think 75% in all, and I'm very proud to be someone, as a woman, leading a board with another woman, or leading an organisation of such largeness and stature, and all the great women that support me and you actually as well, so thank you. There are only a few things I want to say in my board report. I just want to pull out several things. First is Martha's Law, and I think most of you will remember a few months ago that this was introduced after the death of a young girl who died at King's College Hospital from sepsis. And that the NHS is going to roll out to about 100 acute trusts to start with, the testing of this law and how it be used mainly around critical care outreach teams, which for Epsom St Helier currently causes a little bit of a problem, but we'll work through that. But I was also reflecting that we sometimes do have open visiting, and sometimes we do get a little bit of pushback from our nursing staff about how much visitors are welcomed in that way. But I think it's something we're going to have to get used to, because as a daughter of two very elderly patients, I know when that time comes I will want to be with them, supporting them, feeding them, looking after them. And I know a lot of relatives feel like that, and we should support relatives to do that. But I think it's also about the cultural change around thinking that relatives and friends can help patients whilst they're in our care. But also we need to make sure that they're clear about the processes that they can use if they raise concerns or they're concerned about their loved one and want a second opinion. And that whilst we can say we're going to use critical care outreach to do that, there's actually a huge cultural shift in our organisations we're going to need to take in order for staff to feel really comfortable with that and not defensive, and actually that be a good thing. So I think there's a cultural journey for us to go on, not just one of saying that critical care outreach team are going to be it. It's going to be a bit bigger than that. I think the other bit is also about the leadership competency framework. And again, I think that's going to need a little bit more thought, and the final of that I think will come out in autumn. But I think collectively as a board we're going to have to work through that, probably with a bit more thought and at some pace around how we apply that and make it something that adds value and not something that actually is just something we have to do, because I think that's another seminal mark in the journey of the NHS towards transparency. I think the only other thing I want to do is just to say well done to Natilla. Henry, who was our chief nurse for the St George's site, who's now our interim chief midwifery officer, to say goodbye to Andrew Asprey, who has left us for new pastures, and also hello to Ian Robinson, who will be our interim director of, well, we don't call it director of estates facility, but even though I came up with this with Andrew Asprey myself, I can never quite remember his title. But the equivalent, it is the equivalent of the estates and facilities director, who hopefully will be starting with us on Monday for the few months before we appoint someone permanently. And lastly, the staff, we've introduced something. We've done, well, I say we, Anna and her team has done a huge amount of work looking at how do we engage with our staff and how do we celebrate our staff in many different ways. And we launched last week the staff stories, where every week we choose somebody from across all of our organisation to talk about who they are, what they do, and about them really. And this was born out of I think walkabouts that Richard and myself and Anna did between Christmas and New Year, where in every bit of our organisation we happened across a member of staff. And when you got talking to them, and I'm sure we find this on board visits as well, you end up finding the most amazing things about them, and that you never knew. And I think celebrating not just and knowing a bit more about the place they work and what they do, but who they are and where they've come from and their interesting stories is something that we've started to do. So we launched that last week, and I think we had 6,000 or 7,000 hits on it, didn't we? The first time we launched it, it was a lot of people got interested in it. So I think that's just one element of the work that Anna's doing. So thank you, Anna.
Jacqueline, could you just say something about the maternity CQC report for Epsom St Helier?
I can do. Hang on, it is on here, but I'm happy to.
I just think it's something that we should flag up.
So let me just find the relevant bit. So yes, we did receive the maternity report for Epsom and St Helier, and we were. And Arlene and I had long discussions with the CQC about the the reasons why we were given inadequate for one element. And I think most of that was really related to the estate, and it was quite an interesting process that went through, where we were given lots of misinformation, things were changed without clear evidence, and it made me and Arlene pretty unhappy actually in terms of how that was done, because we do believe that and that we do give great care at Epsom St Helier and at George's actually, and I think that was borne out with the survey where Epsom St Helier in the own CQC patient survey of women who had given birth at our organisations actually rated Epsom St Helier the best in London for maternity care, and St George's the second best. So I think regardless of what the CQC found, our women think our services are great, and I think we have to hold on to that.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. Right, I've seen Phil first of all, and then Yin. I'm sure there'll be more. Oh, and Martin. So in that order.
Oh dear.
Great, thank you very much, Gillian. I think you start your report about it's been 2 years in the making of the group. And I was just sort of thinking of that and thinking of all the sort of benefits that's brought. And I do think the fact that we all sit in the same room and we share and we have, committees in common as well has led to, lots of sharing and actually lots of learning and lots of good things. And I just wonder if you'd like to sort of reflect on that, Jacqueline, and what you think the sort of benefits have been so far and maybe the future benefits that we can accrue.
Thank you, Phil. Can I take all the questions, Jacqueline? I just think
Gillian, of course.
Thank you. It'll be quicker, and I want everyone to have an opportunity. So Yin.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about Martha's rule. As I understand it, NHSE will identify which acute provider will be. So do you expect St George's to be one of them? And are we likely to be in the first phase or subsequent phase, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Yin. Martin.
Yeah, so in the board visits, both I and Gillian and others mentioned this ageing population and the impact that has on staffing and also increasing mental health demands. And I'm thinking in the context of this national picture where the NHS comes under more and more spotlight because it appears to grow staff but not necessarily output in a sort of crude productivity sense. The other potential explanation of that is the lack of capital investment in estates and equipment. And I'd be interested in what Jacqueline's practical experience is as to whether or not you think that there's increased pressures financially in terms of operating costs because we're not able to spend what we need to spend on estates and equipment. Thank you.
Good question, Martin. And when the Wi-Fi wasn't working yesterday in George's, I thought it was a very good example of that and the loss of productivity that ensued. Is that okay, Jacqueline? Yeah. You're good to go? I can't see any other hands for the time being.
Thank you very much. So I wish James Marsh was here because he reels off beautifully some more of the joint things that we have. Yes, but he's in Sri Lanka. I could text him and ask him to dial in, but I don't think he'd appreciate that.
Well, it's a bit late there.
I should imagine so. So I think we could all quote quite a lot of things that we're seeing come together. And whilst there's been a frustration about corporate services, actually we are coming together and we have learnt a lot from each other about who's doing things better and adopting some of that, or where we've got gaps that we need to work on together. I see more and more clinicians beginning to work together and some of it more informally than always formally. But there's far more conversations going on, and I think I'd say we as as executive team, it feels like we're more coherent together now, and we're actually being able to face things together and actually work as a team around how we bring the whole of gesh together. And in what way. There are some barriers to doing that, but we've talked about that as part of the board, which are more infrastructure barriers than they are psychological barriers. But I think as we move forward, and I think with the coming together with the university as well, we also become a real force to be reckoned with, and we do. Even though as a board we always aspire to do better in some of our metrics, we do pretty well actually for a large organisation. And just to link into some of the things Martin said before I come back to Martha's Law, I think there are bits about our infrastructure that do hinder us from being more efficient. I think you particularly see that when you go to St Helier, because it's been remodelled so many times it loses some coherence in it's not, what am I trying to say? It's not as coherent in terms of how it's laid out, because in terms of trying to upgrade it, we've done things that makes it not always make sense or flow as much. And I think we'd all feel that if we could put all our emergency floor stuff on the same floor, that would be a really good start. So I think there's those bits, and I think there's definitely things around equipment, and one of the things we didn't say is when we did talk to our neuro ITU, one of the things they did say is that the lack of equipment, and it's that bit about when things break down there isn't a spare one. So if they all work to 100% of the time, actually that would be fine, but they don't, and when they do break there isn't always a spare one to actually be able to use there. So that's something that worries me a little bit that we need to look at. I think one of the things that is an issue is actually the IT, and I don't say that around the, yes, we're going to have one EPR, that's a good thing, but there's loads of things we could do digitally that actually would reduce the amount of what we had to do. And one of the things that we have been given as part of the budget that is an extra 2-point-something billion, I think it is, for digital. The bit for me is about having the right level of staff to be able to actually deploy that, and the capacity we have in the organisations, not just here but anywhere, to actually get our head around what does that mean in changing practices and what does that mean we stop doing. I'm a big believer in the NHS app, and I think we really need to make sure that we are really continuing to push that. When we started, I know at George's, I've got the data in my head, when we started at George's, we pushed the app out. We got up to 60,000 or 60% of our staff or something like that. Andrew might know better than I do. That of our patients actually using it, but it slowed down nationally. So what do we do to actually make sure that more and more patients, not everyone will be able to use the NHS app, and one of their bits is about making that more interoperable, because that will reduce things like booking, etc., etc. So I think that the use of digital and how quickly we can adopt AI will be a game changer clinically. There's beginning to be more tools of AI coming out on the nationally around actually writing discharge summaries, and I've seen it at NHS London Chief Exec, some of the work they're doing at Great Ormond Street, where they're using ChatGPT to actually get discharge summaries written, and it takes minutes to train. And actually, it takes hours off the time that them and other doctors have to be able to give frontline care rather than actually writing things like discharge summaries. So there's quite a lot, I think, in the next 5 to 10 years that will revolutionise the NHS if we can make sure we adopt it and adopt it well. If that helps, Martin. In terms of Martha's Law, I don't think we did put ourselves forward at George's, did we, for Martha's Law?
We haven't yet, but I think there's still an opportunity to do it, so we're looking I think we're looking at maybe whether we do or not yet.
At George's, but not yet at St Helier, we'd learn.
And perhaps we'd explain, I know why it would be one and not the other, but perhaps since Richard's indicated, he could explain, because I think a lot of non-executives won't understand why there would be a difference, and it's important. But Richard, whatever you want to say, can you deal with that as well?
I'll have a go. It was that I wanted to talk about. I think there's still a lot to work through.
if we look at the technical aspects of fulfilling the clinical expectations of Martha's Rule, it is generally thought that they will be fulfilled through a critical care outreach team, because a fully fledged critical care outreach team is available 24/7 to go and see any patient who's deteriorating. And the idea is that the patient themselves or their families can trigger attention from the critical care outreach team 24/7. If you look at the way that Martha's Rule is actually expressed in terms of what is required, it's not quite that directive, so there is some wriggle room and there are some choices. And we have a difference, which is embedded historically from before we were in a group, of the level of provision of the critical care outreach team between St George's and Epsom and St Helier. So in that sense, the St George's is probably more ready to meet those expectations than ESTH. But I'd caveat that by saying that I think there's a principle, if we work in a group, that we don't want to deliberately push something which increases unwarranted variation between the experience our patients get in one hospital versus another in our group. So I think that the approach that we should take, and as I say, we need to work this through, is that even if we can't do everything all at once to a gold standard, we should start getting ready and thinking through what we can do now. And to Jacqueline's point about what a big cultural change it is, we should start getting our staff ready for that as well. And not simply take a binary point of view that we could get ready at St George's, but it would take much longer at ESTH. I hope we can be a bit more subtle and flexible about it than that.
Thank you, Richard. That's really helpful. I hope that's helped Ian, has it? Derek.
Can I come back, Chair, and make a comment about Martha's Law? Is that okay?
Of course you can.
I'm not sure if it's quite right time, but I think what I just want to endorse what Richard said about this being non-binary. And the problem with this kind of incident, like Martha's sad death, is that it becomes sort of process. The only way to respond to it is to create a process. And I think perhaps we need to reflect back on the spirit of the issue and not just the process of the issue. And I think that's why Richard's point is very, very apposite. And I remember reading the first description. I mean, the reason it's got so much attention is Martha's mother was an editor of the Observer magazine, and I bought the Observer magazine that Sunday with a picture of Martha on the front page, and I was shocked. And on the Monday morning, I did a ward round, and I said, what are we going to do differently so this doesn't happen here? I think one of the key issues that doesn't come out, I haven't read the detail of the process, doesn't come out of the process, is the importance of functional clinical teams. And one of the reasons it all went wrong was the hubris, the pride and arrogance of some of the doctors that were looking after Martha, and the lack of integration of functionality in teams. And we've seen in our own trust the issues that arise when you have dysfunctional clinical teams. And I think there's a lot we can do to create the spirit of Martha without necessarily having all the dots and I's crosses. So I very much endorse Richard's approach to say, what can we roll out to make sure our teams function well, are willing to be corrected, willing to hear there's a problem going on, you're not listening to me, and for some avenue for when patients and their families say that. So just want to sort of say, I think we should really push forward to capture the spirit of Martha and make sure we get the process of Martha as well.
Thank you, Derek. I think that's beautifully put, if I may say so. Any other points on Jacqueline's report? No? So can we note that report? It always feels so inadequate, doesn't it? But that's what we're asked to do. So I think we're all prepared to do that. So moving on, we're only a few minutes behind, so I will remind you if it gets out of control. But I do think those points all needed to be made. We're moving on to item 2.1 and the Quality Committee's in common report. Andrew.
Thank you, Gillian. So this is a report from the January meeting of the Quality Committee in Common. So there were three key issues that the committee wanted to highlight to the board, and they're shown in the executive summary. The first of which is in relation to maternity services. So we focused on the clinical negligence scheme for trusts because there was a submission to be made on that at around that time. Just for everyone's benefit, the clinical negligence scheme for trusts is something that each trust pays into, and then if you meet the safety actions set out, you get a rebate of the money you pay towards the clinical negligence schemes for trusts. So there's a financial benefit to complying, but clearly they're important actions in their own right in terms of making sure that we have safe maternity services. So that was the area of focus. at Epsom St Helier, because we then approved, subsequent to the meeting, investment into services at Epsom St Helier and St George's to improve the workforce numbers, and particularly workforce around transitional care, we were able to meet all the requirements at Epsom St Helier to achieve the safety actions for CNST and to get the rebate. For St George's, we weren't able to retrospectively demonstrate that we met safety action 5 around supernumerary midwifery workforce. So we have not achieved fully for St George's, so we won't get the full rebate. However, subject to the investment, we will actually be delivering against the safety action requirements going forward. So I'm confident that we're where we need to be. It's just that unfortunately for achievement last year we did not meet it at St George's, if that makes sense. The second area of focus was on surgical never events. Now, we have had some concerns just because of the number of never events, and particularly those relating to surgery. I'd say we were assured around the never events that had been happening around wrong site nerve block, because we haven't seen any more of those come through subsequent to the actions being taken that had been agreed as part of the action plan in relation to those. So that was assuring. There's still a bit more work needing to be done around never events relating to skin. And then we heard that there's been a review by the Association for Perioperative Practice around our surgical pathways, but we didn't get the report at that meeting. So we're expecting to see a report and an associated action plan. I think there's a number of issues that have been raised in relation to the effectiveness and safety of our surgical pathways, and we need to keep a really beady eye on that at Quality Committee, and we will do. But the next step is to get that report and see the action plan and to be able to scrutinise that. The third thing we flagged up was around complaints. So performance at St George's is good. At Epsom St Helier, there's still a backlog in response to complaints, but there has been action taken, or is being taken, to try and get the right level of staff in that team and to work through the backlog to get us into a better position. There's a number of other stuff mentioned in the report, which I won't go through in detail. I guess the two things I probably wanted to flag up from the rest of the report are the serious incidents, just I guess to make note of the fact that we're in this transition process where we're moving from the current arrangements we've got around SIs to the patient safety incident response framework approach, and we're still in this sort of interim, and we're expecting to see at Quality Committee going forward increasingly both things presented together, and we just need to keep an eye on how we're managing our SIs, because we're running with two processes across different divisions. And the other thing to just flag up is around the fundamentals of care, which is in the section 5 of the report. We were assured around what's going on with pressure ulcers, but VTE, which is blood clots in the veins, there's still more work to be done for us to understand exactly what's going on and to get full assurance. So our assurance on that was limited. In essence, it's tricky because there's a couple of things that are looked at. One is the rate of assessments that take place to look at someone's risk of getting a blood clot in their vein when they're in our hospitals. And then there's also the rates of blood clots actually happening in our hospitals that we identify. And we're in a position where we've got what look like reasonably high rates at St George's, so we're obviously identifying them well at St George's. The question is, are our rates too high because we're having too many? And at Epsom St Helier, we've got relatively low rates, and the assumption is we're perhaps not doing well enough to pick them up. So our assurance was limited. We know we need to do a little bit more work just to understand that fully, I would say. Hopefully that summarises the report for you.
Very well, if I might say so, Andrew. Thank you.
Very comprehensive.
Yes. So, any questions, comments that anybody wants to make? I've seen Richard's hand and Phil's, so in the order I've seen them. And we'll take both comments and then decide who needs to wrap up. Richard.
Thanks. So I think Andrew gave a very clear summary of where we are with never events. Arlene and I and many of us have seen the external peer review support from the Association for Perioperative Practice. The full report will come to Quality Committee with an action plan, but I think I should say here and now this is quite critical. And it has, if I was distilling out the criticisms, the two main criticisms it has And this was, I should say, a peer review that was invited by our surgery division at St George's as part of their engagement with the issues. So it wasn't something Arlene or I commissioned. They asked for it, which I think is very commendable. The review was critical of the fact that some of our systems and processes are not as robust as they should be around theatre checks, and that we could, that they made some clear recommendations about how we can make those stronger. But the other area in which they were critical was around team behaviours and a degree of lack of tightness and lack of clear good behaviours around standardised approaches to the routine work of theatre. And we are picking up on all those things, and we're doing a big piece of work through the medical education and sim department, looking at simulations of theatre environments and giving training in theatre safety, which we're asking all our surgical teams to engage with. Disappointingly recently, the engagement from the consultant surgeons in one of those sessions was not very good. There may be all sorts of justifiable reasons for that, but it's been made very clear to them that we do expect them to attend, and they have got the time and they've got the resources to be able to attend. So I'm expecting to see a much better attendance next time. So I just wanted to be straightforward with the board that the peer review was critical, that it will come to Quality Committee, and that we're already taking actions to address the criticisms. And there was one other thing that I wanted to pick up on. Oh, Andrew was talking about the taking assurance to Quality Committee around serious incidents and the move gradually towards the patient safety incident response framework, which is, you might say in summary, more intelligent but slightly less black and white and easy to deal with in terms of how you structure assurance reports. We're very clear, Arlene and I, that those assurance reports should be co-created in a multidisciplinary way between the nursing team and the medical team. It is too easy for assurance reports to slip into a rather mechanical mode of production from a limited number of people. We got all the relevant doctors, nurses and patient safety experts together to discuss how we'd build that assurance into Quality Committee in the future. I'm sure the first iteration will not be perfect, but Quality Committee will see the direction of travel and be able to steer us. But I wanted to give a commitment that that's going to be a multidisciplinary effort, and that the medical staff will be as involved as the nursing staff.
Thank you, Richard. I think both of those points are really very helpful. I'm glad you flagged up that you've taken action in relation to doctor involvement with the simulation exercise, because I know that that's created anxiety amongst nurses and other theatre staff and the people in the simulation team that have worked so hard on it. And I think that point about PSERF is really important as well, because some of us are anxious, as I think Andrew indicated, though used language carefully, about how the assurance function actually works in a PSERF world, despite all the advantages of PSERF. So thank you for that. Phil?
I think it's probably been answered, actually, and I was going to ask about moving from the SIs to PSERF and a time frame and how it's going to be done. I think Richard's already answered how it's going to be done, but when will we start to see a different type of report here, which will be around PSERF? So obviously it's going to take time and there'll be, it'll iterate, but it'd just be useful to know, should we expect it in 3 months or 6 months, or when?
Quality Committee will see a different type of report from this March, 28th of March, although, as I say, it won't be the finished article, but we'll start to see the change. In terms of how that feeds through to board, I guess the way it feeds through to the board at the moment is through the report of Quality Committee that we're discussing now. And I don't think we've planned anything different to that in terms of the formal public board agenda, but I'm sure also that we'll be talking about it in board development days, and there are other approaches we could take if we need to.
I think it's one of those areas that might become clearer.
Yeah, it'll probably, is it the IQP? I'm sorry, I'm using acronyms when I'm the last person who should do that, but I don't know what these things stand for. But yeah, the Integrated Quality and Performance Report comes here, doesn't it? So that presumably will pick up PSERFs as well.
I don't, so in some ways, yes, but at a very high level. So I think the kind of assurance that the board is needing, and in particular Quality Committee is needing, is of a level that's not reflected in an integrated quality and performance report, and shouldn't be reflected in an integrated quality and performance report. And I wouldn't want to give the impression that Arlene and I or any of us have an absolutely clear vision of exactly what good assurance looks like under the Patient Safety Incident Response Framework. I think we have to wait for that to evolve and shape it as we see how it evolves. But we've got a rough idea, and I think collectively we'll get there. But I don't think the IQPR will be the main vehicle of assurance to the board that we do safety well. I think the main vehicle of assurance is through Andrew's report from the Quality Committee.
I think that's right, and we've talked quite a lot about that in development sessions, haven't we? About just what it'll look like. Andrew?
I think we just need to commit that in the Quality Committee and Common Report to Board, we specifically focus on the transition from the old approach to SIs to PSERF, and we just keep updating the board.
Thank you, Andrew. I can't see any other hands, so can we note the Quality Committee report? Thank you very much. So that takes us on to Finance Committees in common. Anne?
Thank you, Gillian. So you have the report from our meetings in our January and February meetings, albeit the February meeting was actually at the beginning of March, just due to timings. So I think two things that the committees wanted to highlight. One was what the financial position looks like next year. And the other thing is, we've called it ambulance handovers, but I think it's the sort of the impact that has on the whole of the non-elective care. So just coming back to the finance, Andrew Grimshaw will update later where we are in year. We're where we expected to be, perhaps not where we'd want to be, but where we expected to be. So Epsom on plan, George's on forecast, but not on plan. And it's always good in a finance committee if you kind of predict where you're going to be and then you land there, because it tells you that there's a level of control, albeit not funded as much as we would wish. Clearly there's been an impact from industrial action. And I reflect we're in March, the last month of the financial year, not entirely clear what the funding will be for the current financial year, because we don't yet completely know what's going to happen around industrial action, which is a very odd place to be. But it's becoming quite normal in the NHS. Clearly, if you're in deficit, if you have a deficit plan, that has a significant impact on cash and how you manage cash. So the committee has had to put a lot more time into managing cash. And again, I think we're doing that well. There's some really good work going on that. And we've had to look for some relief on cash, but that's being managed properly. I think the thing that is most challenging us is what this means for next year. Because if you start with a deficit in the current year, you've had funding for things like inflation that's not recurrent, which seems slightly bizarre. Your kind of opening position for the following year is quite grim. And we are, I think we've done, albeit there's not yet final planning guidance out, we have done, I think, some really good work on planning. It seems to me that we are further ahead than we have been in previous years around thinking about where we can take cost out. We've got more cost improvement plans in the development stage rather than just ideas. So it feels like we're doing all that we can do, but I think it would be naive to say anything other than the position for next year looks really, really challenging. Probably can't say more than that in this part of the board at this time. So I think that was the point that the committee wanted to bring to the board, that actually next year is looking really, really tight and challenging. And then on performance, we'll come back to the integrated quality performance and performance report later. But I just wanted to make this point around what's going on in our non-elective pathway. I mean, it was interesting to get the feedback from the visit today. I think we all know that is really under pressure, and that makes achieving some of the standards in our emergency departments quite difficult. I was kind of struck that we started to talk routinely about corridor care.
and that seems to me, it's almost like that, what do you accept as normal? And actually that's really quite wrong, isn't it? That we routinely talk about corridor care. Anecdotally, I watched the series, the breathtaking series, and they said, can we stop putting patients in cupboards? And I'm thinking, I wonder when we get to the point where we put patients in cupboards. So I think in terms of the committees, that we've tested it. I think we're assured that everything that can be done is being done, and it's not through lack of effort or ingenuity that things are challenged, but really a really difficult place. I think the other thing I wanted to say, and I think our performance generally is holding up well on things like waiting lists, diagnostics, but the impact of persistent industrial action, not only is it energy and morale sapping on our staff, but people come up with plans to make progress, and then there's more industrial action and it thwarts those plans, which feels like a really depressing kind of place to be in. Again, I don't think it's a lack of commitment, lack of energy that means some of these things aren't going in the right direction. And then the last thing I was going to say was actually, I think one of the things we're starting to do quite well is to sort of think about the performance in the hospitals and the performance in community and how the two work well together, which is clearly the model that we want to get. So it's really good that Thurza is at our meetings and we get that input of what's coming in virtual wards and all those other things. The other things in the report I wasn't going to really say anything about, but that's kind of where we are.
Thank you, Anne, for that really helpful summary. I'll just pick up the point you made about industrial action. I don't think any of us should underestimate the draining effect of that on our staff, and the futile work that they have to keep putting into arranging and rearranging, and the impact on our patients. I think it's all round dreadful, actually. And I also wanted to pick up that point you made about community. We heard in the feedback from board visits about the opportunities, and I hope that we can find a way, the executive can do some work, perhaps led by Thurza, about how we can help the ICB with some of this movement, a recalibration of community and acute work, because it plays right into the agenda about saving money, and it plays right into the agenda of better patient care and experience. I know we've got a lot of finance on the agenda, so it may be, Anne, that we don't have points now, but was there anything anyone wanted to either ask Anne or make a point about at this stage? James.
I think just to build on your last point, I think what we're trying to do, so the South West London has set every place a challenge as part of the recovery on both money and also quality and patient experience for next year, of seeking to reduce length of stay in hospital by 1.5 days. And as places, and me for Sutton, we've all accepted that challenge. And I think looking at what's going on in the hospital in terms of, we're not seeing admissions go up particularly, but we are seeing more complex patients is what we've seen from the visits today. So I think that ambition of trying to reduce the length of stay is the right one. But what we're looking to do is try and do it in a way which is very cognizant of the impacts that we're going to have on partners, and in a sense how, we need to understand that, and if we need to shift resources or arrange resources in a different way to do that in support of it. Because what we're talking about is people who sit right on the interface between acute and community care, and also between health and social care. And there's huge concern right the way across health and care about unintended impacts on partners. So that to do it in partnership, and partnership is more difficult when everyone's resources are constrained, and that includes local authorities, is more difficult than sort of, in a sense, having the freedom to sort of chuck something over the fence and know that your colleagues going to be able to pick it up. So I think it's going to be a very involved process and really test the strengths of our partnerships, both at South West London level but also at local place level, to be able to come up with sustainable ways of reducing length of stay that actually everyone can sign up to and help deliver.
Thank you, James. I think that's illustrated it in a very helpful way. Richard? And then I probably need to move us on because we've got quite a long way to go.
I just wanted to endorse what Anne said about industrial action. And just to say very straightforwardly that the ongoing scale of industrial action in the NHS is not safe. It's not safe for patients. It's not safe for the population. We are very good at keeping our hospitals here in this organisation, and I think nationally we're very good at keeping them safe, but that comes at a great price because we field consultants to cover for the junior doctors and take them away from the planned care, and we've cancelled 1.5 million planned care episodes in the country since industrial action began. I think it's very good that the government and the BMA are now able to put a new offer to the consultants, but they haven't managed to come to an agreement with the juniors, and I would very much wish and urge them to come to an agreement because this is not a safe way to run the NHS.
Thank you, Richard. I completely endorse your comments. And Jacqueline, I think you wanted to come in on this as well.
I also want to give a big shout out to our admin and clerical staff, because it is they who have to cancel all these appointments. It is they who end up having verbal abuse from patients because it's the third time it's been cancelled, and it is they who have to find new spaces and work with people to try and get patients back in. So I just wanted not to forget our lower banded staff who are taking as much brunt about this as our consultants and clinical staff are.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for emphasising that. And you and I, of course, have gone and visited across all three sites to thank those staff in particular. But I think it's important that the board acknowledges this very difficult situation and thanks all our staff for keeping the show on the road. I think it's completely heroic. So lots of commentary on your report, Anne, but no questions. So if we could note that report and move on to the people committees in common. And Yin, you're going to cover this time.
Yes, I am. And I can say that it can be dealt with quite simply because I think the bulk of it is either going to be discussed later today or at the board development next week. But four sort of key things to sort of feedback. So far as the workforce race equality standard and workforce disability standards concerned, we continue to work on a prioritized EDI work plan to make sure that it's a single group-wide action plan rather than two sort of separate lots of plans. As I said, there's a further group board next week at the development board where the discussion will continue to progress the prioritization of the work plan. Second item, the NHS staff survey. We did review the initial results at the People Committee, but I know that we're going to be discussing it later on, so I don't need to go on about that today. Third thing is about bullying and harassment. We did consider the deep dives on actions across the group to address the concerns in relation to bullying and harassment, and the committee endorsed the introduction of a resolution pathway, which is based on 4 stages, starting with informal or local resolution to see whether the matters could be dealt with before moving on to the formal investigation. And the final thing that I wanted to bring to the board's attention was about tackling domestic abuse and sexual violence update. I think Arlene's the champion and for this work stream. And following publication of the new charter by NHS England, the national deadline for implementing the 10 pillars. And don't ask me what the 10 pillars are because I can't quote it now, but I'm sure Arlene will be able to help if you do need the information. It's got to be done by July this year. And as I understand it, we are all on track to sort of receive it. So there are reports for the gender pay gap as well as equality delivery system. Because the information was in the process of being collated and analysed, delegated authority was requested for the People Committee to approve the reports for March 2024. And then the final thing to say is there are quite a lot of information in the report, which I won't actually go through it, but it's safe to say that there was quite a very helpful piece of work that we sort of considered, which is learning from the junior doctor workforce experience, and some of the matters that we discussed about ensuring the system was fit for purpose, improving culture, and also improving the offer for locally employed doctors and international medical graduates. So I had to learn what LED and IMG was, but there we have it. So very happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Yin. So, any points on the People Committee report? As you say, Yin, we've got the staff survey later on, and are we confident, Arlene, that we're going to hit that deadline for the sexual yes, because
sexual safety at work.
Yes, it's a big ask, isn't it?
It is a big ask, but I think we're confident in that we'll be able to put in the infrastructure. I don't think that we would get there by July, where we have all of the teams, or maybe all of the information. We'll have the information out, but it really relies on us being able to reach our teams and reaching the vulnerable, or people affected by it. So we're working with comms to look at how we get that wider piece out. And on the steering group, we do have representation from all of the staff networks, Freedom to Speak Up, and all of these is the softer bits around how we get to find out when these are, how we make staff feel confident about reporting it. And that's the bit I think but we'll have the infrastructure by July.
Thank you, Arlene. That's very helpful. Any points on any of this? No. So we've got to do more than simply note the report, as Yin emphasised. So, as well as noting the report, I'm not going to read out all the words. There is this delegating authority to the People Committee to report to approve the gender pay gap and EDS system. I know that we're under pressure in HR at the moment, but I just have to say it's too often that we don't manage to plan getting these reports through the committee system, so they come to board. And both of these papers are actually really important. I'm not looking at you, Angela. You've been here 2 months. You can't possibly make a difference on this in 2 months. But I continue to be disappointed about this, and the fact that too often the board's concern about EDI matters and leadership of it has to be taken into board development sessions. So we spend the time, but I don't think we're always able to give the public accountability in the way that I would like. And I do think for the future we have to pay attention, and I'm sure that the People Committee, polite though it is, feels this very strongly. I really don't want to have another year where we're not properly considering in board matters which belong in board territory, having been considered by People Committee. So I'd be grateful, Jacqueline, if the executive, with all the many pressures that you have, and I'm terribly conscious of those, can pay attention to this and recognise that leadership has to be seen to be done as well as being done. Right, I'll get off my soapbox now. Are people happy to support the recommendation? Thank you very much indeed. So that takes us to the Infrastructure Committee, and that's you again, Anne.
Thank you. It is indeed me, but of course I wasn't able to attend.
But Tim is in Barbados, I remind you.
Infrastructure Committee. And as you say, Tim decided to go to Barbados rather than come here and present the report, and I absolutely understand his prioritisation. So you have the report in front of you. I thought it was interesting reflecting on the visits, actually, that Derek was talking about, the visit to medical physics, that it chimes very nicely with the assurance that the committee received around medical physics, where we actually feel that there is reasonable assurance about those processes. So it's good to be able to triangulate that with feedback from the visits. But I guess the points to sort of pull out are those on the executive summary. One is around the electronic patient record implementation. And as we bring these things together, which is absolutely the right thing to do, but we shouldn't underestimate the difficulty of doing that, particularly when you've got a live system and you're bringing other people into it. So there have been some challenges in the implementation of that, which the committee has gone through. Some of that is sort of commercial information, but I think the committee was satisfied that actually there needed to be a delay to the go live of that, to make sure that we did it in a safe and stable way. I think some good progress around the green plan, which is always good to hear, particularly on Peter's agenda. So he may be able to say a little bit more on that. And I guess the other reflection, Derek was saying from medical physics that they got a need for 20 million of capital. And of course, the one thing that neither trust have is sufficient capital to do all that it needs to do. And prioritising that is really difficult. And of course, getting that balance between trying to run the hospital more efficiently, which probably requires some investment in some technology, but not having enough capital, to cover some of the backlog stuff, is a real difficult tension. We bring it here for the board. There's nothing really the board can do. The capital will be what the capital is, but I think being aware of that is probably important. I will leave it there and leave it to those who are at the meeting to answer any detailed questions.
Thank you, Anne. I was conscious reading the report of the amount of risk we carry because of the lack of capital to invest in our estate and IT. That makes me quite anxious, actually. Phil?
Thank you, Gillian, and thanks, Anne. Yeah, I was at the meeting, and I'm going to expand on Gillian's point a bit, really, because I think there is something to really think about here. There is a lack of capital, and a lot of very good teams are coming to report to this committee, and at the bottom of their very good report, there's, I wish we could have this, I wish we'd have that. And Andrew made the point in the committee that this wasn't the committee to approve CapEx, which is quite right. It's the committee to start working on the risk. But I think there is a mindset required here that actually there probably isn't going to be more capital unless it's already allocated. And therefore the teams need to have the mindset that they're going to have to find workarounds. And I know that's not great at all, and it's a really difficult, but it does change the way you think about things if you know that magic, 2 million isn't going to appear to magically upgrade the CCTV or whatever, which means that we've got to use the CCTV we've got harder and in better ways, and this is a really difficult thing to do, and I think we need to think, and maybe it's something we need to take back to the committee and to think about how we encourage the teams in the most positive way we can to use their great skills to get the best out of what we've got.
Thank you, Phil. I think it's a really good point. James?
So just building on that, I mean, one of the things that's become increasingly apparent over the last 2 or 3 years of planning capital programmes is that there's sort of a double whammy, because we've got, quite significant demands on the programme, and then also the technical specifications that we're expected to reach for many of the refurbishment projects we do are getting higher and higher, and that's a good thing, because what we're saying is that we want higher standards around, for example, issues like ventilation, but actually, I mean, we had a very good briefing from our capital projects team to the ESTH site leadership team this week on the cost implications of meeting some of those standards, particularly around ventilation. And in practical terms, on a fixed budget, they mean that if you are going to be absolutely fully compliant with every single standard, you can do maybe 3 things instead of 6 or 7. And so I think there's definitely something for the board over the next few months, which is that actually to work out where the best bang for the buck is. There are routes to derogations, But obviously that needs to be a sort of a full leadership community decision to actually do a few things to a different standard, because actually that's how we get the best out of the finite resources that we have, and it's probably not something that has been something that we've done historically. So I completely agree, Phil, and I think there's some, I think actually understanding the implications of those new standards on our capital programme and how we work through them is going to be a real challenge.
Thank you, James. I'm just so pleased that we have an infrastructure committee that can spend time looking at some of these issues in a way that, frankly, the Finance Committee couldn't. And I think it puts the board in a much stronger position. So, Anne, if the committee could take forward those things, that would be really helpful. And can we note the report? We've not lost any further time, but we've not picked any up. So I just need to keep our noses to the grindstone. Is that okay, everyone? Yeah. Lovely, thank you. So that moves on then to the George's Audit Committee report. And
thank you, Gillian. And it's two separate reports, but hopefully for the last time. So we'll maybe save a little bit of time next time around. But first of all, the George's Audit Committee report, which was on the 1st of February. The covering note identifies three issues I'd just like to talk to briefly. The first of which is around the annual report and accounts, and what as of the beginning of February, we were advised we were on track with the accounts and aiming, obviously, to put us in a position to submit by the end of June. That's the kind of goal we're working towards, and as far as I'm aware, and Andrew isn't looking at me with a concerned face, that we remain on track for the external audit and accounts, which is good. Alongside that, the annual report is an important opportunity to tell the story about what's been happening, to celebrate some of our successes. And again, we're building on a much improved report last year. And I think this time around we'll see closer alignment between the Georges and Epsom St Helier. So it gives more of a sense of the group working together. So that's a positive thing, but I think Anna's nodding there at the back and on the case. So that's positive. Yeah. Secondly, then, on internal audits, and again there was some positives on progress on implementation of management actions, which had been a concern of the committee, but we saw good progress being made. We approved the 24-25 plan going forward. The one area which there was still some scope for and was going to mean a very busy last quarter is on the 23-24 plan, where there have been some delays in signing off of reports, and it will make for a very busy next committee when they all channel through, hopefully for sign-off. But so we expressed some concern about those delays, and obviously keen to make sure we get off to a good start for next year's plan, aren't held back by finish off this year's. But we'll look forward to progress on that front. Then thirdly was the discussion around moving from two separate committees to committees in common, which was very much agreed by both committees, went to the board, and the board endorsed that. So you'll be familiar with that. By way of follow-up, keen to make sure we're not just bolting two committees together, so being in discussion with Steve and with Andrew about how we can best integrate where it's appropriate, but also deal separately with the respective issues around the accounts and how we deal with that. And I'm sure that should be possible. So that work's underway. And I think it was really, for the Georgie side, those were the 3 points.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Peter. Any points on the George's report? So we're asked to note that and then move swiftly on to ESTH. Peter?
Yeah, moving swiftly on. On the annual report and accounts, we're in a slightly different starting place in that, as you recall, we had some issues, late submission of the accounts on the ESTH side last year. So we're keen to make sure we learn the lessons. There's been quite a lot of work with the auditors to make sure we can avoid some of the pitfalls of last year, which has been the appropriate focus, and with the audit starting a little bit later as a consequence. But as of the beginning of February, again, we were assured that things were in a better place, lessons were being learnt, and that we should be well placed to submit by the end of June timetable. We'll be putting in place some further kind of touch points with Andrew and the team just to make sure there's no surprise if issues are raised. But I think a good degree of confidence, and again the same applies on the annual report about the work on that front. On internal audit, again, good progress on management and implementation, implementing actions. Good progress, it has to be said, on the 23-24 plan. Further advanced at this stage than George's. We received, I think, 4 reports, and of which 3 out of the 4 were reasonable assurance. One area of partial assurance were around sickness, absence, and that will go forward to People Committee for follow through and making sure some of the areas of concern would be picked up. So again, that is all good. And then finally, again, just on the moving towards a joint committee front, that was approved and agreed without any real debate. So overall positive, and we meet again as a joint committee, I think it's the 17th of May for the first time. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed, Peter. Any questions or comments on the ESTH report, or can we note that? Thank you,
Good
Colin.
progress there.
No, I think it's excellent, and I know how eager Peter was that we go sooner rather than later, and sometimes you just have to wait until it naturally feels like the right time. But thank you for your patience and guidance around that, Peter. You were determined to get there, and got there we did. Right, okay, so we can move on now to item 3 on the agenda, and the integrated quality and performance report. As I said, we're a few minutes behind, and it's easy to lose further time on this item. And so I just remind the board that the report has been to 2 subcommittees of the board and had a pretty good scrutiny. So I would like to invite Kate, then James, then Thurza to flag up anything that they think is important. And then after each of them has said whatever they think is important, we'll take any questions on that. But I do want to finish this item pretty promptly, if that's okay. So, are you going to go first, Kate?
Yeah, of course, Julian, I'll be very quick. Just to reiterate, elective care has been impacted by industrial action. I think it's probably fair to say that the RTT waiting list is relatively stable. It's just not been coming down. Our over 52-week wait is above plan, but our over 65-week wait at St George's, we are below plan. And I think the question for us is whether we can get where we plan to get by the end of March, given the industrial action. And we're doing our best to do that, but it's at risk. We continue to have good diagnostic performance. Cancer is a challenge at St George's. We have not met our faster diagnosis standard this month. That is almost solely driven by skin and a backlog of skin referrals that we have not managed to get on top of. We are looking at working with an insourcing company with the help of our own partners who've given us some funding to try and help us get that backlog down. We're working really hard to get Telederm up and running, and we're looking at what we can do a bit in the same way as breast, to invest some of the money that we continually use to try and get on top of waiting lists back into the service, alongside stronger job planning and a variety of other things, to get that service back on track, because every summer we get out of kilter and we've really struggled to get back on track. The referrals have gone up and up and up. And then finally, because we've talked about it quite a bit already, urgent and emergency care. I think we've probably covered a lot of the challenges we have in the department around patients waiting for beds, exacerbated by ambulance handovers, which has led to more corridor care. We are doing lots of work in terms of the flow and what the opportunity is to reduce the length of stay. So as James referred to, there's some system work going to be done on that, but we are continually working with the system and with our own processes to improve those as we capture no criteria to reside much more sustainably now here at St George's, so looking at earlier notification where patients need support to leave the hospital. And we're launching 4 programmes of work to enhance all of the work going on around ED and flow, looking at re-looking at the interprofessional standards, looking at the future of Majors B, which we've touched on, that work's already started, learning from strikes, particularly at the front end, because we've generally seen a real improvement or reduction in the number of admissions that we have during those strike periods, and looking at accelerating, refocusing on same-day emergency care, because we know quite a lot of patients still go through ED who would be same-day emergency care suitable. So that they're areas we're particularly focusing on, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Kate. Whistle-stop tour. But I think all things, as you say, we're familiar with. Any questions? Andrew?
I've just got something around the IQPR and governance. So it does say in the cover sheet that we had the quality committee in common in January, but at that we looked at the December IQPR. So we haven't formally, as a quality committee, looked at this IQPR, and that's partly because we're shifting to a different way of working, where we're looking to have a formal meeting bi-monthly and a development session in between. But that is going to, the details of that proposal will be brought to the next quality committee. But what I would say is we're having conversations about this all the time, and I'm confident there aren't any new things emerged since the December one. And that's part of what we did in the development session as well, was to try and move away from looking at, well, this changed this month, so we should focus on it, to look at trends over a longer period of time.
Thank you, Andrew. Helpful. I mean, I am absolutely confident that we're cited on the things that we need to be cited on. We are going to have to sync the new arrangements carefully, but I know attention's being paid to that. If there are no other points, can I move on to ESTH and ask James?
Yeah, so just probably a couple of things to flag. I think, firstly, just linking back to the conversation earlier, we have seen 3 consecutive months where our VTE screening performance has improved. I think, building on the seminar we had about statistical validity, I don't want to call it as a special cause variation yet, but hopefully we'll continue to move in the right direction. We are looking to focus on the particular areas now within the organisation where we know that we've got relatively lower screening rates, and also identify whether we do have the right people going through screening mechanisms in some areas, because some people were being counted as admissions but aren't actually technically suitable for screening, so we need to continue to work on that. On the elective side, so I think long waiters is a bit of a tale of ups and downs, so we are seeing movement on community paediatrics now, which is really positive, so those are beginning to come back in. Equally, we're seeing other areas where we're really struggling. So gynecology, we've laid on extra capacity, but it's been really affected by industrial action, and that's continuing to keep the 65-week waiters quite annoyingly high, really. That said, pleasing to see the diagnostic performance come in to maintain the cancer performance, and also to see that the theatre utilisation is now on a very definitive upward trend. I think we're going to hit a ceiling where, again, our estate, and particularly the lack of things like preoperative assessment rooms, begins to limit how much further we can go with that, but it is positive to see it moving. I think on the urgent care side, I'd point to what's happening with length of stay again as being so critical, because it's, if you look over the last sort of 2.5 years and at the whole run of the data, it's up almost 2 days. And then you think about the 12-hour length of stay, the ambulance handover, the issues with corridor care in ED. We can do a lot to mitigate some of those challenges in the department, and through things like boarding, so that we get the early flow on a day and maximise the bed capacity that we have. But the fundamental underlying issue is we need to get the length of stay down and make sure that, despite having more complex people in general in hospital, we're doing everything possible that we have the right length of stay and the right inputs at the right time. So that just, looking through the data, that is the theme I would pull out of it around urgent care, is really where we have challenges. With all of them, the underlying driver is not having the beds and the length of stay being a significant issue.
Thank you, James. Really helpful. I think, the board must acknowledge the continuing excellent performance on cancer despite all the industrial action problems. I mean, it's a huge achievement. And I know how hard your people work on that. So well done and thanks. Any comments for James? Martin.
So it's really across both sites, but I'm thinking about the issue in ED with patients suffering from mental health problems who are sort of stuck there, as I see it, that there isn't really anywhere else that they can go, and the impact that has on patients and staff. I know there was some work going on and it could be more of southwest London, I'm not sure. But there was some work going on to see whether it was possible to find another facility which could be appropriately staffed, that would at least take the impact away from patients and staff in ED. And I wondered if there was any update on that.
So there's been a lot of work done, Martin, and Quality Committee is keeping a close eye, but could you just give a quick summary, James?
Yes, so the two potential different schemes for the two different sites. So with South West London St George's, we don't, at St Helier, we don't tend to get the sort of long stays, but we do get quite a high turnover. So we're looking to see whether we can put a sort of rapid access clinic model into ED. With Surrey, we get a different pattern, which is we don't possibly get the volume, but people do stay for a long time, particularly when they need a bed. And so we're looking at whether we can create something that's more of a sort of longer-term assessment unit that could be staffed overnight. There are active discussions with both mental health trusts, and the engagement is good on both sides. So as we work it through, I'm sure we'll be in a position to bring more back.
I think that would be helpful, because whilst Quality Committee is keeping a close eye, I know it's a matter that's really Exercise Board as well. Derek?
You mentioned rapid access clinics, and I sometimes wonder if we do enough at the other end of the patient flow pathway. So we have rapid access clinics at the early part of the patient flow pathway, and in my own department I've seen that really being very effective. But I wonder if there's something, I don't know whether we do it or have a name for it, a sort of high intensity follow-up clinic, because I get the impression there's a cohort of patients who could sleep in their own beds, but we keep them in our beds because they need another blood test the next day, they need a scan the following day, they need a review in 3 days. So that's the kind of patient you can't send home and put them into a follow-up clinic, because your next follow-up clinic is a month away. Whereas if we had the capacity and the resources to do something, I mean, I'm calling it a high-intensity follow-up clinic. We've used our rapid access clinic in that way sometimes, but it doesn't quite fit the bill. But I'm wondering if there's more we can do for patients to say to the patient, can you sleep in your own bed and come back tomorrow, and we'll see you on our ward round tomorrow. I'm sure there's more we could do with that work. Is there any capacity for that, do you think? Maybe it's the wrong place to raise it, but
no, it's not the wrong place.
It fitted with what you were saying about
yes, no, it's a good question.
Moving flow. And I'm not talking about the elderly patients where the package of care isn't in place and they're not safe in their own home. I'm not talking about that kind of patient. There's another cohort in between who could sleep in their own bed. They don't need nursing care, but we're keeping them because we're doing something with them, and we haven't quite finished the management episode.
James, could you hold it? Because Thurza is
I was going to just
itching
suggest
to come in.
So thank you, Derek, because you've just really well articulated one of the reasons of why we've created the virtual wards. So the virtual wards that should have consultant cover, that shouldn't be just about frailty, are designed to do exactly as you said, and to prevent people staying in a hospital bed just because that's the way they stay on a waiting list for a diagnostic. So that whole pathway is part of the opportunity around virtual wards. If you look at the community data, there is still capacity in the virtual ward. So in answer to your question, yes, it is there. It is working with the different specialties across the different sites to make those pathways one that everyone trusts. And that means working pathway by pathway, because realistically people do still want to keep their patients where they can see them because they don't trust what's happening elsewhere. So you have to redesign the pathway and make people feel confident in it. We're working across EPS and St Helier very much on the respiratory pathway, which is a sort of a key one, but there are many others that we could work on.
Very helpful, thank you, Thurza. So anyway, QU, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about what I would say that hasn't been said before or in this meeting. So the 1.5-day reduction in length of stay is an ambition that is achievable, and I think it is right that it is focused on at place. I think there might be more work that we could do to make sure that the voice that we bring around integrated care is heard across all of our places, because I think that's a critical and a real opportunity that we could take forward. Speaking on behalf of Surrey Downs, the ambition isn't a Surrey Heartlands ambition, but we have embraced it as a Surrey Downs ambition, so we can report back across the four places that gesh serves, and I think that is important. The work is quite different in the different places, and I've just point out in terms of good news stories, if you go down into the detail of the IQPR and you look at for Surrey Downs and therefore the Epsom site, the length of time that people are on from time they are fit for discharge to the time they're discharged on Pathway 3, reminding the board that Pathway 3 is someone where there's been a life-changing event and they are going into a care home from their own home. So this is a significant event, has sustained now at 15 days, and towards the beginning of the year it is much longer than that. And I think that we should note where we've had success as well as where we have continuing difficulties.
Thank you, Thurza, and seek to build on that better than we do. And I know it's much easier in Epsom St Helier because we've got the community services than the situation in George's. Andrew.
I just wanted to, I thought Derek made a really good point and Thurza's response was good, but it just slightly, it made me step back and think. We've talked about the performance challenges we've talked about the financial challenge, and yet we're focusing just on the respiratory cohort because it's sort of one at a time. But if we've got capacity in the virtual wards, I just wonder why we're not really going for it more across I know it's difficult because you've got to persuade people to get trust, but it feels so fundamentally important to maximise performance and financial gain. I just feel maybe we should be doing a bit more there.
Well, I think it's not for the want of trying, I might say, but Thurza, I don't know whether you want to come back. Jacqueline certainly wants to come in. Thurza first?
And I can see that James does as well. Happy to take the challenge. I think that it took longer for the virtual wards themselves to establish themselves and feel confident in the first piece of work before moving forward, and it has taken longer than we thought in terms of working with clinicians who aren't used to working with community services, if I put it that bluntly, in terms of having that confidence to work with us. So happy to take it as a challenge, but James might have more insights in terms of why it's perhaps more of a challenge than we anticipated when we started this journey.
I think it's a big cultural issue personally. James, and then Jacqueline. And then I need to close this down because we're losing time.
It's culture and process. So just to give a very quick example, when we had a particularly bad week, we did some patient-level reviews as a site leadership team of all the patients who were waiting for something to go. And we found a patient who could potentially go to the virtual ward, but they needed oxygen at home. Now, what we discovered was that the process to get a patient out to the virtual ward required them to be technically not medically optimised, because the virtual ward is an extension of the hospital service. But the process to get home oxygen required a patient to be declared as medically optimised. So they were on 2 bits of paperwork. So you couldn't both discharge a patient to the virtual ward and order them home oxygen at the same time. And you've got to do that, and then you've got to tell everyone you've done it, and then every time you change your junior doctors, you've got to tell a bunch of people again, or rotate your therapists. And it is a process of constantly sort of busting the administrative challenges and the cultural challenges, and then also re-educating people, because actually a lot of the people who are making the decision making and the day-to-day processing on those medical pathways, are people who move. So we agree. We think there's more opportunities to optimise there, and it requires an awful lot of time and attention. I think a lot of the work that we're doing on the 1.5 day challenge will be about trying to simplify these processes as much as possible, so that the easiest thing is to get the patient into the right place quickly. Whereas I think sometimes what we do is we create a new initiative, create a new swim lane, and actually the whole map, if you're the busy clinician on a post-take ward round, just gets more and more complex, and that actually gets in the way. So it's complex and it's partly cultural.
I like the swim lane analogy, James. I think that illustrates it nicely. Jacqueline, final word, and I need to move on.
I think probably James has captured most of it. There is a cultural issue, particularly with doctors that we have around their reticence, with or without a virtual ward, to discharge people out of their care. Sometimes also the same with therapies, actually. So I think there is a big piece of cultural work we need to do about how we federate risk in a different way, because I think that is the underlying issue that we have to address.
And the board will recall that we did explore some of this when we had a patient story at, can't remember whether they were at Epsom or St Helier, and it was a while ago now, but the issues haven't really changed. Anyway, we're asked to note that report, and I'm going to hurry us along if people are happy to do that. That takes us to item 3.2, the finance report. I think we've probably covered most of it, Andrew, but over to you.
Okay, just quickly in summary, Epsom St Helier remains on track to deliver its plan, which is a 37.9 million deficit, excluding the most recent industrial action. I'll come back to that in a moment. St George's plan is a 15 million deficit. For some time it's been forecasting to be 15 million adverse for that, so reporting a deficit of 30 million. We remain on track to deliver that, again, with the one exception being industrial action. They were both reported as variances to the forecasts and plan positions in line with NHSE reporting requirements. Suffice to say, we are, post this report being published, we have beginning to see allocations coming in and the expectation that we manage those positions within available resources, so we're just working through that at the moment. What I would say is at this stage, we are confident that we can deliver the forecast as stated, but I think it's worth saying there are pressures operationally, there is complexity, i.e. the industrial action issue that's coming forward, and it's moving quite quickly as well, so just to do that. The only other thing I will give notice on is we'll probably see some changes in the headline plan positions as we move into next year. That's a consequence of a technical adjustment by NHSE in its requirements of how we report or how they report trusts or systems in deficits. I'm not going to go in any more into that. We're working through how that one will work. It won't change the fundamentals of our underlying actual position, but it will change our plan positions. So we will work through that, but there'll be more detail on that next month. It's just a heads up that is coming.
Thank you for that, Andrew. I think we've probably covered this, and we've got another discussion on money later. So are people happy to note the report so that we can move on to item 3.3, the NHS staff survey, and we have picked up a bit of time. We're only 2 minutes out, so that makes me happier. Angela.
Thank you, Gillian. Perhaps I can just give you the headline overviews of the NHS staff survey report. So this was actually a staff survey that was taken between the 2nd of October last year to the 24th of November. And the purpose, I'll provide an update of that, but the initial results were received from an organisation called PICA, which is for both St George's and Epsom's St Helier hospitals, and also the Staff Survey Coordinating Centre. So the results themselves were actually taken from both sites separately, so from St George's Hospital and also from Epsom and St Helier. So they're not as the whole of the gesh group, they're actually from the two separate trusts. So there's also a comparator between what we were between last year and this year, i.e. 21 and 22, and it also looks at the average between sort of a comparator which is done through the PICA management. So I'll give you sort of two comparators. In summary, if we look at St George's, so we had a 38% response rate from St George's, which was actually down from 48% last year, which is quite disappointing, and we'll be looking at how that is and why we've had such a drop in people responding. The actual national average from the PICA survey is 46%, so St George's is not only below what we were last year in terms of people responding, but it's actually below the national average of 46%. Epsom and St Helier actually did much better. So we had a 49% response rate from them, which was a slight dip from 50% last year or the year previously. And it's 3% above the PICA national average. So we had better results from Epsom and St Helier than we actually did St George's. We've actually looked at the responses and sort of we've collated them into buckets. So looking at perhaps staff engagement, so if we look at St George's, the staff engagement, it shows that the score remains unchanged actually within St George's itself year on year at 6.8%. So advocacy's actually increased by 0.1% from 6.7. So that's up 6.8% from 2023. 67% of our staff have said they'd be very happy with the standard of care provided by the organisation if a friend or a relative actually needed treatment, and that's actually 4% higher than the PICA national average. If you look at Epsom and St Helier, their staff engagement score has improved to 6.9%, and advocacy and motivation there both improved by 0.1% to 60% of staff. They would recommend the organisation as a place to work, and that's a 4% improvement on last year on the average. We've actually done a lot of work last year, and what we've done is we've actually identified 5 sort of what I'd call buckets, of what we call our big 5 areas that we've been looking at for improving things for our staff. And those actually fall into the 5 areas that they fall into are civility and psychological safety, a safe place to work, compassionate and inclusive leadership and teams, leadership and inclusion, and high-performing teams. So 5 buckets of information, and we've actually mapped the results of our staff survey against those. For St George's, the initial results show that we've seen improvement in some aspects of our Big 5 programme. For example, we've seen improvements in staff not experiencing physical violence from patients and colleagues. We've had a very positive interest in staff health and well-being, respect from colleagues, constructive handling of disagreements, and open communication with managers. But the areas for improvement are regarding our staff voice, i.e. they've raised concerns about how they can, the decision making, raising concerns, and also it's highlighted they'd like managers to listen and care more. For Epsom and St Helier, regarding improvements in the Big 5, they've seen improvements in all of those. I think that the safer working shows the least improvement, so we will be looking at that as we go forward. There's lots of work that we've still got to do, particularly with our ongoing values of work. This is in St George's, for example. That's highlighted flexible working, incivility and psychological safety, where we've got a lot more work to do, and compassionate and inclusive teams, especially sharing purpose and our objectives. Still work to be done in Epsom and St Helier to embed all elements of our Big 5, as well as addressing sort of like our development opportunities for our accounting and our clerical staff, our assistant and clerical staff. Retention actually is an area that is the same for both St George's and for Epsom and St Helier's. So we have seen some improvements in people thinking of leaving, but we do remain significantly below our PICA average for that. And in looking at overall next steps, we've actually, the initial reports that I've put before the board today, they were the very top headline reports that came out. So they're very initial ones that came out in January. We were embargoed until actually only March the 7th, where the full reports actually came out. So what we will be doing now is actually we'll be able to give, certainly for the future reports for the board and to go through people committee, we'll be looking at what now does that mean from a very detailed analysis for our staff. And although the embargo was only lifted on Thursday, what we have seen, just very, very overview, is that there has been an increase in how engaged our staff feel. A place for our treatment, you know, that we would refer it has gone up to 67%. That's still about 5% below the PICA average. We've also seen that we're consistent with other organisations as a great place to work and with having good morale overall, so that's been consistent. And we've also seen an improvement in appraisals, that's up 2%, that people are saying that they've got clear objectives and it's actually helped them to do their job. So again, from the embargo that was lifted, we've just got some very initial findings. So what are we going to do next with that? So what we'll do now is we'll send out all the very detailed analysis and the full reports to all our departments, and we'll be looking at that very closely with our group exec. We'll be reporting that back to the people committee and the board, but that will now go out to the departments for all our staff to be able to sit down and have a look at that. We'll share that with our staff over March and April. We'll have lots of workshops on that. We'll also involve our staff on how we can improve and what priorities we need to do. And throughout May, we'll be collating those to see what sort of action plans we're going to put in place and how we're going to be able to take that forward. And also sharing with staff what we've been working on and what the staff survey results were last year and what those improvements have been. So that just gives you an overview without actually blinding you with statistics and percentages of what we're trying to achieve. We do want to make this a great place to work. We know that it's actually very challenging, I think, for our staff overall. Lots of pressures on us, but we have incredibly dedicated and committed staff who we've got a very good level of consistent staff engagement with, which we will always seek to improve, to listen to them and to work with them very closely on how we can actually improve their career, how we help them to work and to do their job. And I think what has also come out from the survey is a very high percentage of staff who recognise that care of our patients and the community, the work that we do, is exceptionally high.
Thank you, Angela. I think it's important that we find time to hear from colleagues around the table. I've seen Martin and Phil and then Andrew, and we'll take it in batches of comments, I think. So, Martin?
So whatever else happens, we, as always, will have to come up with an action plan, a list of actions which we hope will improve the results next year. And I'm just wondering, well, my perception is that in the past, one of the things that we haven't perhaps done as much as we could have done on is looking at best practice elsewhere. And I don't mean the overall engagement score, because there's loads of reasons why that might be high in one place. But the NHS is almost uniquely placed in using the same survey for a long time across similar organisations. And I wonder if there will be some work to look at on particular questions, who are the best performing organisations and what is it that they do that we might want to do, because it's evidence that it would work here. And conversely, what are they doing where they've got low results that we might want to avoid? I'm just wondering what the thinking is on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. In relation to action planning, I want us to do a small number of things really well, not a large number of things badly, and I think the results for George's are immensely disappointing, and that just needs to be called out loud and clear. Phil?
Thank you. So, a couple of points. One, just thinking ahead to next year, are we going to do this as a group? Because obviously some departments are already as one sort of thing. So, or are we going to keep this split? And sort of then the thinking of that, do we see Epsom and St Helier as separate? So is there because there's a huge difference between George's and Epsom St Helier. That's where sort of my head is, which is slightly weird really, and so we need to get our heads around that. But is there a huge difference between Epsom and St Helier as well? Would be quite interesting to know, because the cultures there, obviously they've been together much longer, but it would be really interesting to know, I think, because, and I only say that because there's so much difference between George's and Epsom St Helier, which I didn't expect there to be honest. And so, and as we break this down, it may be that, you know, it won't be the same action for everybody. So the action, which again doesn't sound very groupy, but to be, you know, the action in St George's may need to be different from the action in St Helier, because there are different things going on, and I just wonder whether we've thought about it from that perspective.
So I am going to sweep up the questions and probably ask Jacqueline to lead the responses, assisted by Angela, because Angela's been here 2 months. And I think the trick, but Jacqueline will answer it more eloquently, I'm sure, than me, is to get the right top things across the group and the right things in each area. And I think we will hear some commentary that suggests there are some parts of Epsom St Helier who are noticeably better than the rest. And that leads into Martin's question, I think. So, Andrew.
Thank you. I mean, I welcome the consistency across both reports and the way it's been grouped into themes, particularly linking it to the Big Five. My question, though, is really then about the use of data and the analysis, because there's an awful lot in here, and there's quite a few sort of what seem like quite small variations between one year and the next, 0.1, a few percentages. And with such a low response rate, I just want to make sure that we're chasing the right things and we're not making assumptions that because something has changed that's significant. And I think it's even more pertinent when we then send the information out to individual departments, the numbers are going to be even smaller. So I guess it's just how do we support teams to look at the data in an intelligent way and to look at the things that are actually significant rather than getting blinded by all the small movements. So that's my sort of question and challenge.
Thank you, Andrew. Are there other points that people want to make? Shall we hear from Martin? You want us to come back?
If it's all right to have another one. Yeah, it's a different
go on.
point.
I'll be generous.
Okay, so it is on it is on action plans, but it's a different point. You know, one of the risks is that we have multitudes of action plans, and I wonder how it's going to be managed, because there's probably more aspects than this, but the dimensions we've got in a complex organisation are, you could look at nurses as a group, you could look at sites, you could look at departments, and then you've got all the protector characteristics. There is so much data, and obviously what sometimes goes wrong is you have too many action plans being done at too many different levels, and particularly teams is an issue with that. And this also builds on your point that one of the things I think we've said many times, but hopefully we can now implement, is that whatever else we do, we have to have fewer actions, do fewer things and do them well.
Thank you, Martin. I can't... Oh, Peter.
Thank you. And just to pick up the George's completion rate of 38%, which is seems incredibly low by comparison, whether, I mean, it can mean sometimes two things. One is that people are generally feeling okay and don't feel that motivated to respond, or second, it can be, well, nothing has changed when we've done it in the past. And maybe that comes back to Gillian, your point about fewer things better, but do you have an initial view, and this is perhaps more to Jacqueline than Angela, about which of those it is in terms of the understanding of the low engagement? Because whatever we want, having much higher engagement, even if it's difficult messages, is preferable to just the sense of actually people can't be bothered. Thank you.
Well, I have my own anecdotal answer to that question, but it's not for me to say. I think I'm going to ask Jacqueline to cover most of these points, and then Angela will pick up any technicalities that aren't really for Jacqueline. Is that okay, Jacqueline?
Yes, it is. So I think firstly to say, when we have broken down into sites and departments, which we did this week, now we've got that, one of the things, if we take Epsom and St Helier, who have improved, and that's brilliant, and I think they have improved generally, but there is some differential between the acute site and the integrated care. And I think what we've seen is actually we've seen a bigger improvement in integrated care, so well done Thursday and team, than we have on the acute site. And I think there is something about where is the best practice in our own bit before we look at where else we've got. So I think we have got some best practice, and I think number one. And I think there is something about getting some of the best practice, which we have done some of actually. So I'm not taking these in the same order, but I'm just trying to sweep them up in a way that might make some sense. So if you look at some of the things like we've been doing in RES and WDES, particularly WDES, we have seen an improvement in that, and that's been aligned, I think, with some of the best practice about centralisation of budgets and actually really driving to get to know where our staff with disabilities are. That has actually driven some improvement. It's not where it needs to be, but there are some best practice things that we do and we do take. But I think there is some more opportunity to do that. There was something I think the board knows that we did interview yesterday for the Chief People Officer, and it was really interesting. We had 2 individuals, both of them not from the NHS, who applied different set of data analysis to our metrics. We didn't give them ours, we gave them someone else's, but actually I think this would bear true for us. And it's something that we probably have picked up, but it really rings true. And one of them used AI to do it. And what that showed, it was that actually the biggest issue our staff have is a lack of flexibility. That came out the biggest bit. Martin can explain more. He had a good look at the graphs that I can. But
not now, because
no, not now. But that actually, and that is not something we've really picked up other than saying, well, it's down to your manager and here's the policy. We need to do a lot more around driving into what is it that with the majority of our staff, the lack of flexibility actually means, and how can we address that? Because I don't think we really have. I think saying we've got a policy and it's down to your manager is probably not really getting into what the issues are right on the ground. Because we can be flexible even with people who work shifts. So I think there is some more. I think we've agreed as a group, but I'm looking around as my exec colleagues, that we want to keep going with the big 5 because they are beginning to make some traction, and we don't want to go, here's the big 5 and here's another big 5. I think it is the big 5, but we need to do something, I would say, around the bit I just said. So I don't think we want to make any changes from that. But when we give people their individual data, sometimes you can see in that data for those departments where actually we really might have a problem. And we do need to do something different with those departments. Those departments are in the bottom 3 or 4. I think we learnt from maternity last year, if we don't take notice of those ones that are in the bottom 3 or 4 that we have in our areas and actually work with them to improve the feedback from staff, then actually we get into bigger trouble, because that usually is an indication of something that's going on in that department, and that is something I think we will have to do a bit differently this year. I'm hoping my exec colleagues are thinking that's probably the right thing to say. What do you say? George's completion rate. So when I first came here 7 years ago, we were in the 38s. And we have driven it up to being one of the best the best in terms of staff survey people who respond. So 2 or 3 years ago, we were in the early 60s, I think, if I remember. I'm looking at Gillian because I'm just trying to remember my memory.
It was probably 4 years ago.
I think,
anyway.
you know, if I talk to Kate, I know that she was really trying to drive it. I'm just not sure whether we ended up driving it in all the right. Everybody had that view that Kate was doing, and I'm sure you were pushing your team, Kate, and you told me you were. The bid is to get underneath it, and I think what Gillian would say, and it's what I feel, is it's not because people think it's all right, it's because people don't think that we're doing anything that makes a difference. So what's the point? I think that's the biggest bit we have to get over. So I think that with that, and my colleagues might want to say a bit more than that, but that was all I was going to say, Gillian, if that is helpful.
No, it's very helpful, and I think you've probably covered all the points, other than Phil's, are we going to keep the split? We have to, at the moment, while we're 2 separate trusts, we have to report it in that way. But I think if we're keeping the big 5, I still wonder if 5's too many, but you know, I've made that point very many times. They will be across the group, and it is about the local action planning and the ownership that individual leaders and managers take for that. And that's where we need to put quite a lot of effort in my view. Anyway, anybody else want to say anything? I'm going to give you the last word, if I may, Angela. Kate.
I mean, just to come back on the St George, I mean, I agree, the response rate was really disappointing, and I think we know that a less good response rate doesn't help us get a real feel for things. But without a doubt, I think in departments where we went, and I personally went into a number of them where we could see the response rate was low, the feedback generally was, well, what's the point? It makes no difference. So I think we've got to overcome that. We tried to do a lot more of you said we did. We've obviously talked about the big 5, but some of that's not landing here yet. So I think we need to really think about that for this coming year.
Thank you. And Andrew, were you indicating? No? Anybody else before I give the last word to Angela? Okay, Angela?
Yes, it's just to bear in mind that the 38% from St George's, that is 62% who didn't put in a response. And I think it is important, you know, your point, Andrew, that when we look at how we actually send these the response rate back out to teams, it is only a very small number of people who've responded. And I think there's work to be done perhaps more on trying to understand or find out in some other way what the remaining 68% of our staff at St George's who didn't respond, and how we can try and gauge, you know, some reaction other than just what we've got from a staff survey. We do have pretty, even though they're depending on the response rate, we can break it down very substantially into areas across both of the trusts and divisions and departments. So that actually does give us, you know, you have overall figures, but if you go underneath the headlines, you will see that there are some quite, you know, differentials in scale for people that respond to things, which is where the detailed response is actually quite valuable to be able to give you, you might look at a headline, but there are differences in areas and departments and in sites. So that will give us a pretty good idea to be able to pick out, hopefully, where some of the problems are. It is a really valid point from what Martin is saying about ensuring that we get best practice. And I think that there is work that we can do and should do across other trusts to see what has worked well for them, what are they doing, and what perhaps should we not be doing. And also to look at that internally in our own sites as well, because there'll be some nuggets of information there. It's perhaps just not to throw the baby out with the bathwater for terminology, but lots of work to do. And I think that one of the things perhaps to just leave a note of, in terms of leadership and in terms of what the board, but certainly what our group exec can do, and with our managers and our leaders across the organisation, is to try and communicate, hopefully, although we have communicated, but try and find a better way to actually explain to our staff that they do have a voice and that we are listening and that this really does make a difference, and to try and give some tangible results to show that.
Thank you very much indeed, Angela. So I think Ian and Martin, the board does need the People Committee to be all over this, and I know you're both in that place. We're asked as a board to note the high-level results, to note the evaluation of the Big Five, and to note the next steps. So are we happy to do that? Yeah. Thank you very much, colleagues. So that takes us on then to item 4.1 and the group board assurance framework. Of course, the board has spent a lot of time on this, but having this in public is a very important part of kind of finishing the task, really, isn't it, Steve? So over to you.
Yeah, and I was going to say something similar by
Oh,
way
sorry.
of no, not at all. I was going to say something similar by way of introduction. That, you know, I'll be fairly quick on this because the board has spent quite a lot of time over the past year. I think it's been a really good, engaged process of board input into the development of the framework, which I think is good practice. I think so. What's here is the first full new group-wide board assurance framework, which sets out the risks to the delivery of the group strategy that we introduced in May last year. It's been developed, as I say, through a number of board development sessions. We signed off the strategic risks on the board assurance framework at the session in public in November. And since that point, it's been through the relevant board committees in January and February. So what's here is the culmination of looking through the first fully populated iteration of the board assurance framework. It's important to emphasise that this is the opening position. We will expect, and we really do expect to see it evolve over the course of the coming weeks, months, and over the course of the year as a whole. I think it's probably worth saying that the assurance ratings, which arguably are on a board assurance framework more important in some ways than the risk scores, quite a number of those start, 11 of the 14 start with limited assurance. I think that's less because we are genuinely lacking in assurance in these areas and more a case of we've set some strategic ambitions over a 5-year period, and we need to see the assurances coming on stream and being able to evidence those. So I think that piece, I think we can expect to see evolve significantly in some areas over the course of the next year. I think the other word that I was going to say is in relation to the actions to address gaps in assurance and control. Arguably, this is the main area of focus that I think the board committees and the board need to focus the discussions on. And I think what's in here is a good first attempt to iterate what those actions are. Those will need to evolve, and I think particularly the crispness around the time frames of them. I think also worth saying this is an attempt to pull together actions that exist across the piece elsewhere. This is not a new set of actions layered on top of other things. So I wasn't going to go through the 14. I'll take it as read, but just to say this is the first full iteration of it that we've got, and I think hopefully that is a good starting point for the year ahead.
Thank you, Stephen. I think on behalf of the board, I would just say a big thank you to you because you've led this work. It's been a complex piece of work. The collaborative effort that has underpinned it, I think, has been significant. And I think we can honestly say we own this, but you took the lead role, so a big thank you. I would have liked to see some of the actions a bit more refined, but life's imperfect, and we've talked a lot today about the pressures on people, and of course that does inevitably affect people's time and headspace to perhaps pay as much attention to the actions as I might like in a perfect world. So, recognising we have had a lot of discussion on this, is there anything that anybody particularly wants to say? Jenny?
Well, first of all, to echo the thanks. Stephen, these are one of the external showcases, just in the way we have the Picker survey and other things of comparators. You've done a lot of work on this, you've probably spoken to your peers. What is your reflection on the modifications that we've made, and in terms of us helping the group progress?
That's a good question. So in developing it, I did a lot of engagement with other trusts in terms of what their BAFs, how their BAFs are calibrated, and I think we can be confident that what we've got here reflects accepted good practice around what a BAF should be and the kinds of information that we should have in it. I think there are, in terms of the specific risks, they need to be relevant to us and our strategy. But there is a lot of commonality with what we see with other trusts. I think in terms of helping us progress as a group, I think, well, two things. I think it's helpful to have in there the early risks around SR3 in particular, around our group-wide working, and for the board to be keeping an active brief on the progress of that. I think it's helpful as well that we get to see the kind of, in addition to the group-wide risks, then what the trust-specific positions are in terms of the corporate risk registers, because then I think we can see some local variation where the risks may be higher in one trust than another, and we can explore what the reasons for that are. So I think seeing a side-by-side comparison of corporate risk registers is quite useful in that respect. So I think, the BAF needs to reflect our reality, but I do think there's a lot of commonality with good practice and what others are doing.
Thank you, Stephen. So I've seen Peter. Can I just check whether there's any others so that we're not keep going back to Stephen over and over again? No? Okay, Peter.
Okay, thank you. And again, thanks to Steve for the work on this. But I've just kind of had a look at, despite the work in individual committees, when you look at the opening position for the BAF across the piece, I mean, almost universally the target score for next year is lower than where we are, and in that sense, if it wasn't, it'd be worrying. But nonetheless, it suggests a whole lot of change happening, a lot of capacity in some really quite challenging areas, from working across the system to tackling health inequalities, all of which we're keen to do. But are we being realistic about the scale of change that we'd like to be able to achieve over this next year, given all the other pressures we're working with?
It's a good point.
It's a good point and a very fair challenge, and I suspect we'll come back to this next week when we talk about corporate priorities for the year ahead and some of the decisions we need to make around prioritisation. I think with some of these, and you mentioned health inequalities, I think part of the reason that's a limited assurance rating at the moment, and we expect to see that going up to a reasonable over the course of the next year, is that we are at a point where we are just beginning to frame what the intentions are around some of that, and the Quality Committee had a really useful first discussion about health inequalities and is scheduled to have more of a plan around it at the next meeting. And I think when we start to see that coming through, we can then think about, when there's a clear plan, it's not to say that we'll get there over the course of the next year, that's a 5-year strategy, but I think when we have a defined plan and can see that we've articulated that and it's credible, I think then you can begin to see the assurance building from there. So just to take one example of how, so it's not about delivery within the year, but it's about having the plans around it.
So unfortunately for Richard, that's given me an opportunity to have a bit of a bleat about health inequalities and my anxiety about us making real progress, actually. So that's why I think Peter's challenge was a good one. Did you want to say anything, Richard? No requirement, but as you know, I'm anxious to see progress here.
There's a paper coming to Quality Committee at the end of March giving an update on where we are.
Good. So whether or not it'll help the board assurance move on, we'll see. Right, I can't see any other hands, so the action required by the group board is to review the current risk and target scores for each strategic risk, review the current and target assurance rating, note the risks, and note in particular that sub-specifically for group board, so they haven't been through a committee first. Everybody happy to support this? Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Right. So now we can move on to the closing items of the board. So the next item is new risks and issues identified. I'm not conscious that there's been anything new. I think it's sadly all horribly familiar to us, but am I missing something? I can see a lot of people nodding in agreement, so that suggests that everyone's in the same place as me. Item 5.2 is any other business. I haven't been advised of any, so I hope nobody's about to pull an unpleasant surprise on me. No? And then that moves to 5.3 and reflections on the meeting. And I've asked Yin to lead this section today. Yin.
Thank you. So today is a good day to have the board meeting, International Women's Day, and I saw that Arlene was giving vox pops as well, and I think there was some filming going on, so it was very nice to see that. And I thought there was a good start to the day as well in terms of the ward visits. I certainly really enjoyed going to ED with Arlene and with Andrew, and a shout out to Andrew as well for the way you fed back. You covered everything very well and covered all bases. So I think it's really good to have that at the forefront of our minds when we meet. It was also good to just take some time to reflect 2 years of coming together, gesh working together, and as Jacqueline said, there are more infrastructure barriers rather than cultural barriers, and that we are a force to be reckoned with now, particularly with City St. George's. I couldn't quite remember whether it's City St. George's or St. George's City, but I think City St. George's. I thought we had a really, really good discussion with appropriate, effective challenge. So, for example, there were some discussions around the virtual ward and what Jacqueline said about the sort of potential sort of cultural issues to be addressed. We also had a very good discussion about the NHS survey and the results and the plans sort of going forward. It's quite interesting coming from a non-NHS background in terms of how NHS surveys are sort of conducted. There are some sort of things which we could talk about in terms of improving it, but also some learnings to be sort of derived from it. I really like Martin's suggestion and Phil and Peter about looking at sort of best practice and about looking at a group-wide approach. And certainly as chair of the People Committee, together with Martin, we will definitely be working with the People Committee to be all over it. I think overall it was a really well-balanced, well-chaired board meeting, kept time, which is great, plentiful biscuits and coffee to get us through the day as well. So, you know. So, and on that note, I shall stop so that we can get on with the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. Anybody else got anything that they loved or hated about the meeting that they feel compelled to share at this point? No? Okay. Now, we should be moving into the patient staff story. Unfortunately, our patient is stuck on a bus. And so what I'm proposing to do is pause the meeting to take the questions, because the questions are not technically part of the meeting. And then when the patient arrives, we will move into the patient story. So it just seems a sensible way of utilising our time. Are people up for that? So we've got questions from Councillor McCabe, and I'm sure we will have questions from our governors as well. Councillor McCabe's were submitted in advance, so I'm going to go to those first of all. And the first one was about the CQC report on maternity services. Peter, you don't need to read it out, do you, or do you want to? No? So, Arlene, I think you're going to answer it.
Yeah, thank you, Gillian. So the question, in case anybody hasn't seen it, is around the CQC report on St Helier maternity services and what action the board will be taking to ensure Merton residents that the service is safe. And I did meet with Councillor McCabe last week to go over this, but just generally we have strengthened how we record some of the information that we found that we weren't able to provide for CQC around training. And then there's assurance now that we have achieved the CNSD action around training for all staff in maternity, and we were able to declare that compliance by the end of January, and that has gone off. We have looked at the issues raised around estates in particular. As those of you who have seen the report will know that there were particular issues around a door that had graffiti on it, which was addressed at the same time. But also we have looked at strengthening how we ensure that the maintenance or any urgent issues, are addressed much more promptly, maybe, except the estate is really poor, and so those issues come up quite frequently. One of the issues that CQC raised was around the triaging of women and saying that it wasn't done promptly, and that was not to do with the fact that it wasn't happening. It was to do with the fact that we did not have a separate line for triaging. So if a woman or birthing person contacted the department, there was one phone. So, and we had evidence, which we provided, that phone was answered within seconds, 99% of the time. But CQC felt that wasn't good enough, and we weren't able to demonstrate that we had a separate line just for triage, and therefore we have put in a separate line. I suppose it's not about we weren't doing it on time, and we are now doing more regular checks of our facilities and equipment. We've changed how the equipment is checked because that was one of the issues. There was one piece of equipment on a resus trolley that was not in date. Around privacy and dignity, we have again reviewed how we manage that, and for the bereavement area in particular, it was one of the curtains that wasn't long enough. We have we have reviewed that, and we've dropped the railings because the curtains come in a standard size. So we have we've addressed all of the actions that were identified, the immediate actions, and we continue to ensure that we audit and address any actions as they arise. I think the biggest news probably is that we have agreed to, the board has agreed some additional investment into maternity for staffing. The issue that we had for St Helier was that we had midwives who were going into theatre to scrub for caesarean sections and therefore were not available to deliver midwifery care. The funding that has been agreed will partially go to funding those, funding theatre nurses to scrub in so that midwives could get on and deliver midwifery care. It makes sense, but it was something that we needed a review, and our new director of midwifery has done that and has identified that as an area that we can win in releasing our midwives to deliver midwifery care. And then the final bit of the investment was to implement transitional care. And transitional care in a maternity is around having a unit where mothers and babies can stay together. Sometimes when babies are born, they need a little bit of additional care. They might need antibiotics, a little bit of oxygen. And traditionally, what would happen is that those babies were taken off to a unit separate from their mother. With transitional care unit, we will have enough staff now to be able to keep the mothers and babies together so that they can be looked after and reduce any separation. And that investment has been signed off by the board. So I hope that all of that provides some assurance that we have taken the actions required to the immediate actions, but also that we will continue to look to review and ensure that any further action needed is carried out promptly.
Thank you, Arlene. Councillor McCabe's second question is whether the board still believe that a new hospital in Belmont will be fully funded and built by 2030, despite all the risks identified in the National Audit Report on the new hospital programme. James.
So the Trust is working closely with the NHS New Hospitals Programme to deliver the scheme, and has recently had additional fee allocations confirmed to work on the design and planning requirements for the Specialist Emergency Care Hospital. Furthermore, we were pleased to note the ongoing support for the scheme expressed by the Government in a parliamentary debate last week.
Thank you, James. And the third question is, if the new hospital in Belmont is built, how many Merton residents for whom St Helier currently provides emergency care will be displaced to George's, Kingston and Croydon? And please provide estimated number for each hospital. How will the emergency departments cope with the increased number of patients? James.
So I'm going to refer back to the pre-consultation business case for the Improving Healthcare Together scheme that was developed in 2019 and 2020, and the figures in the pre-consultation business case relate to the overall trust catchment. They're not available for Merton specifically. But those figures, and I've included the reference in the written answer, were that St George's would receive 1,700 additional ED attendances and 2,000 additional emergency admissions per year. Kingston would receive 1,800 additional ED attendances and 1,400 additional emergency admissions per year. And Croydon would receive 5,100 fewer ED attendances and 700 fewer emergency admissions per year. So this data isn't currently available at borough level. However, I do also reference in the written answer that the integrated impact assessment that was done for the consultation, which was based on the same data set, and that identified that no Merton resident would see an increase of greater than 10 minutes in their blue light travel time under the Sutton option. In terms of the supporting those hospitals, the Building Your Future Hospital scheme includes capital provision for the impact of those changes, and that was agreed with these providers at the time of the consultation.
Thank you very much indeed, James. And Councillor McCabe, you'll get written answers to all of your questions, so thank you for your questions. Now, we've got a number of governors in the audience, and George's governors are able to ask questions on the day. So I think, Alfredo, you very kindly alerted Stephen to the fact that you had a couple. But might you like to come forward and ask your questions, and then I'll get them answered, and then see if any of the other governors does. And then I have a number of written questions from one of our new governors, which I'll deal with when we've dealt with Alfredo's questions. So is that all right, Alfredo? I'm hoping that mic might work.
Yep, it does. Yes, during the Chief Executive's report, Jacqueline informed us about the creation of the Violence and Aggression Task Force. I think that is a fantastic initiative because no member of the staff should be subject to aggressive language or threatening behavior. But my question is that what is the extent of the work of the task force? Because it is important to understand the root cause of those incidents. We can say that anecdotal, we could say that, for example, mental health issues might be a factor, but also a perceived lack of care and diligence might be another factor. So what is the extent of the task force initiative, and would the voice of the patient be sick and taken into account?
Jacqueline, you're going to kindly answer this?
Thank you, Alfredo. So the view from NHS England, which I absolutely agree with, is that there is no circumstance, even with a patient with a mental health illness, where violence and aggression should be shown against a member of staff. For me, it'd be like saying to a surgeon, it's all right you threw that scalpel at a member of staff because you're under stress. That is not acceptable. We wouldn't accept that in theatres, and I don't accept that on my wards and departments. I think one of the big things that we have recognised is that our staff don't feel well equipped and don't feel that they can really address people who are being rude and aggressive and occasionally violent to them. And we have seen in our EDs and actually across our wards and departments over the last couple of years an escalation of violence and aggression towards staff. Including chairs being thrown at staff, punches being thrown at staff, and generally quite horrific incidents that they have to deal with, particularly when people, members of families threaten that they're going to follow them home and hurt them. All those things are quite horrible. So the one thing that we can do, and this is why I've taken this up personally, is to support our staff being protected from individuals who both initiate violence but also give continuous rhetoric to staff of aggression. Because often it's not just one incident that we're dealing with. It's often patients or often their relatives who are continually aggressive towards staff in a particular environment, and that has to stop. So I'm working with staff. So I've asked staff to nominate themselves, and I've got about 20-25 people from across the organisation, including those from facilities who actually look after our security guards, who are actually going to work with me about putting in a policy that supports our staff and that we can support our staff. Because often we don't get to hear about these really horrible incidents until weeks or months after. And sometimes we only find out by accident, and then we can intervene and we can yellow or red card individuals. So that is why patients aren't included in this. I can understand why people might get upset because they're having to wait longer and things aren't going well. That does not mean they can verbally abuse staff or it'll become violent towards them. I hope that answers your question. You can tell I'm quite passionate about it.
Can I just say that I was talking to a doctor yesterday who described a patient who's been on our wards for some time now, who took a screwdriver out to staff and other patients yesterday. And this is unfortunately no longer an uncommon occurrence. And I think it's entirely unacceptable, Jacqueline. Andrew, I really don't want to debate around this. So if we can keep the comments brief. I'm just conscious that Alfredo's got another question, and at any minute our patient might arrive for our
That's fine. We can. My comments and thoughts we can pick up outside the meeting. I'm happy to move on.
Right?
Yeah.
Sorry, you know I hate stifling. debate, but I'm just conscious we've still got some stuff to get through. So, Alfredo, you had a second question.
Yes, the second question is about never events. I think it's a very, very good that the Quality and Safety Committee has elevated the never events issue to the consideration of the board, particularly taking into consideration that report that we are about to receive, or we have already received from the Peer Review Institute, but also taking into consideration the results from NHS England, where they made a comparison in number of never events results from April to December last year. And there were 2 trusts, I think Birmingham and Newcastle, with 9 events, but St. George's was third on the list with 8. So it is very clear that this is an issue. And my question is for the Quality and Safety Committee and for the board, having heard what Richard has suggested as some of the actions, are we satisfied that we are doing enough to stop the alarming increasing of never events in St. George's?
Thank you, Alfredo. So I think that's initially a question for a non-executive, though I'm conscious that we're a unitary board, so I may well ask Richard to comment after Andrew.
I don't think there's not one answer to that question, because when you talk about never events, obviously what we've seen is that there's particular themes to them. So I think what I would say is on the issue of never events around wrong site nerve blocks, which we saw a cluster of, I think we are reasonably assured that the right actions have been taken and we're not seeing more. On the issue of skin, I think we've got increasing assurance around that, because we know that it's being well investigated and that there is a plan in place. I think on the issue of surgical pathways, no, the Quality Committee is not assured enough yet, and until we've seen the report and the action plan and then start to see progress against the action plan, I think none of us will feel adequately assured that we're doing everything we can.
Thank you, Andrew. No requirement, Richard, to add anything, but I do want to give you an opportunity, recognising, as I say, that we are a unitary board.
Thank you, Gillian. I agree completely with Andrew. I don't think that the external peer review report or the associated action plan will be the assuring thing. I will feel assured that we have done everything we can when the trend reverses.
Thank you. We now have a number of written questions from one of our governors who's not present. And the first one is about consultations with regard to the building of a new hospital over 14 years. James.
So the question was, yes, about...
So technically, of course, it is a George's governor, and that is a ESTH question, but anyway.
Yes. I think it could have been a public question, and I think Mr. Lehendren has asked similar questions as a member of the public in the past, so right. I was...
Yeah, well, we're in a bit of a grey area, aren't we? But the gentleman concerned likes to be called Logie. I'm a bit doubtful about calling him Logie, but he likes to be called Logie. So he's asked a number of questions. So let's just for now play it straight, shall we? He's a governor, and he's asked a number of questions. So, as I say, the first one is about BYFH and the activity over a long number of years now.
Yeah, so ESTH undertook... so the question said that there's been no firm design ever produced, and that's not quite right. So Epsom and St Helier did actually undertake pre-planning engagement on a hospital design in 2021, but we were asked to pause this work to align with the NHS New Hospitals programme, and we're now in the process of agreeing with NHP and also with Sutton Council the timescale for a planning application to go back with a revised design. The government has committed to the scheme being completed by 2030. There was also a question about the costing consultations, and I'm presuming that this referenced the consultation on the reconfiguration, and that was run by the CCGs at that time, so neither trust in the group holds any data on the costs.
Thank you very much. Logie's second question was, is Springfield Hospital a part of gesh? The answer is no, it's part of South West London St George's Mental Health Trust. The third question is a request for a breakdown on the number of physician associates. I don't think it's helpful to read out numbers in terms of an answer. We'll provide that information to Logie. And the final question is about patients being sent home late at night due to transport, and if so, what social care is in place? And Kate, you're going to answer that.
Yep, thank you. So it's to start by saying we really try not to send people home late at night because that's not good for the individual. It does sometimes happen for various reasons. Sometimes transport is delayed and they struggle to lay on the amount of transport we need to get the people home. If somebody does need a care package and they're going home late, we would delay their transfer till the next day. We wouldn't send them home without a care package. If that ever did happen, that would be an error, but we certainly would never plan to do that.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed, Kate. And so as if by magic, our patient has arrived, but I am going to have a 2-minute break because I am absolutely desperate to go to the loo. And I don't want to be in any way discourteous to someone who's made an enormous amount of effort, clearly having been stuck on a bus for some time, to get to us. It's Mr. Jeff Thompson. He'll be joined by Wendy Doyle, who's our patient participation officer, who's familiar to us all. Kerry Smith, who's a urology nurse and advanced clinical practitioner, and Mr. Hassan Kazi, who's the consultant urologist. So we should shortly be having a bunch of people join us, which I think gives me 2 minutes to run to the loo. Thank you. Could people please come back to the table and cut out the private discussions that are going on? So again, a big welcome to, where's Wendy?
She was here a minute ago. She's there.
Oh, Wendy's there. And also Sue from Patient Voice, who I'm told found Jeff. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I did think that Sue needed some credit, and she's sitting quietly, not wanting any credit. So a very warm welcome again to Jeff Thompson. Can we call you Jeff, or do you prefer Mr. Thompson? Okay, so to Jeff, to Kerry, who's the nurse specialist, as you can see in the lovely dark blue, and to Hassan. So we're in your hands. I think, Jeff, you're going first, are you? Has somebody told you how the technology works?
Got it.
Great stuff. Over to you.
Okay, do I move forward a bit? So you could all hear me there perfectly. Yeah, I'll go straight into it. And yeah, as you all know, I'm Jeff Thompson. I was diagnosed with prostate cancer in March 2018. The journey with prostate cancer at that time, seemed relatively well. Yeah. I've just said, a while ago that I'm very happy to know that the surgeon that operated on me is right here on my right-hand side, which is, rewarding enough. But yes, I had a successful operation. It was after the operation that everything just went dark. I didn't expect to go through what I went through. My story is very long, but I'm going to make it very short. I recall, suffering with, erectile dysfunction, severe erectile dysfunction, urine incontinence, which is something I didn't really envisage. I thought to myself, yeah, I'll have urine incontinence, but not so bad. I recall at the same time, I was in, a relationship at the time for a good 14 years. I remember hugging my partner at the time, and she turned around to me and said, "Let me go, because if you cannot satisfy me, then there's no point you holding me." Now the whole ground just opened up, literally, and I thought, oh my God, cancer is really robbing me of my life. If that was one thing, anyway, she moved out suddenly because I realized, you're here for the wrong reasons. I recall, not wanting to go outside much. I was a martial art instructor for 23 years. I felt myself to be relatively fit in body. And I thought, cancer is one thing that would never affect me. But yet it did. It didn't just affect me mentally. I mean, physically. It affected me mentally. So while my body was healing, my mind was not being healed at the same rate. I remember, you know, a lady by the name of Helen, she's from Macmillan, spoke to me and said, look, Jeff, you need to go out, you need to exercise, you need to, you know, just get that, you know, your body moving. I said, I'm not going out because I'm wearing pads and everyone's going to notice I've got pads on. And how embarrassing is this? So if I sneezed, I'd wet myself. If I moved too fast, I'd wet myself. If I laughed, I'd wet myself. So I tried my best to keep away from social life. I even stopped drinking water because I felt to myself it would be better for me in not drinking because of the constant leakage and embarrassment. Anyhow, I was encouraged to, you know, wear these pads and go out for a walk. And I remember, thought, okay, I was told these pads were super absorbent, so if I did have an accident, you know, no worry, it won't leak. So I put on these pads, and I put on my khaki trousers, which I love khaki, and my white t-shirt, very long, so that it will cover over my front area. I felt okay. It's a lovely summer's day. I'm walking down the high street, and there and then, a friend of mine who I hadn't seen for a while crept up behind me in his car, tooted his car horn, beep, 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 beep. I jumped. And as I jumped, you could imagine what happened. I thought, okay, I got these pads on, they're super absorbent. And I felt, you know, the burst of urine. But somehow it felt like this tap wasn't switching off. And it just kept coming and coming. And I remember looking down on my left leg, and it's no exaggeration. It felt like my urine was trying to create the map of Africa as it flowed down my legs into my trainers. I was so embarrassed. And to top it off, there were school children in front of me pointing and laughing. I just tunnel vision. I went home, and it was a beautiful summer's day. I recall closing my curtains. I disconnect myself from the outside world, and I sat there, and I thought, is this what cancer has done to me? I was not expecting this. There's no way cancer should really come and ruin my life like this. I started looking over everything that I was going through. The lack of socializing, me not wanting to laugh, me not wanting to go to the toilet, so I want to stop drinking water. I didn't want to go to bed at night times because it was so uncomfortable. All this time I'm thinking, maybe there's just one way out, and that's to end it. I had, you know, some tablets. Every time I go through this, it's like I have to go right back to that day. I remember having some tablets that I got from the hospital for painkillers and so on, and I looked at those tablets, and I contemplated at first, and I thought, if I drink water with these tablets, it's going to take too long, you know, for me to end it. So I had a bottle of rum called Ray and Nephew. And when I say a bottle, I mean a large bottle. I don't drink. But at this point, this is what I thought will take me out quicker. I took the tablets, and then I drank the bottle of rum. And as it was going through my system, I felt the most hideous, awful, burning sensation. And as it was going down, I'm still drinking. I'm in pain, but I'm still drinking because I just wanted to end it. I didn't want to live because I just felt cancer had robbed me of who I was, robbed me of my character, robbed me of my outgoing, my incoming, even my finance. I just felt totally lost. Anyhow, I remember feeling as if I'm going, and it was a good feeling. I remember lying on the bed and just waiting for death to take me. But luckily enough, it didn't. I threw up profusely. And knowing that some of the tablets that hadn't been dissolved came back up, it was just gross. I don't even want to go into detail. Now after that, the penny dropped. And I thought, cancer didn't kill me. So why am I trying to take my life? That's when I realized I used the word, the ghost of prostate cancer had, come upon me. That psychological side when nobody sees, but only you that's going through it feels it. I picked up the phone and I remember calling a friend of mine who had told me he had prostate cancer, and I asked him how did he feel, what was it like for him. He said, did you not see my wrist? I said, yeah, you normally wear sweatbands on your wrist. He said, no, I try to take my life. I didn't tell him what I did. And so we kept talking. And as we're there talking, he said, just talking to you makes me feel as if I'm being healed, mentally, not physically. So we kept talking, we had conversations, and he said, like he says, Bill down the road, he was going for the same thing. So I thought, hey, let's get Bill together, let's all have a conversation. So there was 5 of us on Zoom. It was during the COVID period. And we're there having these conversations. And to hear men sitting down and just being so open about what they're going through just made me realize that we need to talk more. And we talked about support after having had, our surgery. And I said, you know what? Psychological support, to me, should be one of the first things that's, appointed to someone that's been told you've got prostate cancer. Not even just prostate cancer, cancer in itself. Because that moment when I was told, I remember it's just white noise, really. Weren't taking anything in. But we all, got together, 5 of us. We spoke frequently on a Friday. And it just got so spicy, our conversation. So we talked about the sexual side, the erectile dysfunction. And I thought I was the only one whose partner had left them, only finding out it seemed to be a common occurrence. Going on, we decided to keep this, support going. And it started, we ended up having 10 guys, the next week. And it just started to grow and grow to the point that we had 50 men on Zoom. And we were all there having these wonderful conversations. And it just grew and grew. And eventually, a pastor that runs a church over in Brixton Hill offered me, a space where I could come and, bring these men together and we all talk about our experiences with prostate cancer. At that point, we had 750 men turned up in the church. Yeah? And just by listening to everyone's conversation, it just showed me that there is some kind of a gap, okay, in the system, especially after we've left the hospital. It felt, a lot of men said, we felt like we were on a production line. It's almost like, okay, next. Fair enough, we get information and so on, but follow-up is so much more important. Support is so important. We have chairs and tables in here. They've all got legs. There's support. We, as men that had experienced prostate cancer itself, we also need support and ongoing support, not just while you're going through your treatment. It's gone, April the 6th will be 6 years now since I was diagnosed. And like I said, prostate cancer itself, I decided not to make it win. I decided not to let cancer beat me and not to let cancer rob me of my life. I'm going to say something that might sound a little strange. Having had prostate cancer has made my life so much better because it's caused me to understand things that I took for granted. It caused me to look at life so much differently. It's caused me to have more empathy for others. It's caused me to stand up and fight for others. Every day I get referral from Croydon University of men who have been diagnosed with prostate cancer who just want someone to talk to. So I always say talking is the first step to our healing. Because if we don't talk, nobody knows what we're going through. To date, I've got over 2,000 men that I've communicated with. I was also honored to have the chance to go to number 10 Downing Street, and only recently to be recognized on the One Show, the BBC One Show. So when I look at the negative, where I'm coming from, I don't regret it at all. Because it's, to me, it's like me going to university to go and learn something which is known as lived experience so that I could help others. We do have men and women that come out to our support groups. I have a number of support groups literally all over, from Birmingham, Brighton, Lewisham, Croydon, Vauxhall, and we're just constantly putting these groups together because there's a need for it. And we just have to just be there for each other and understand that, you know, if I was a doctor or a surgeon and I'm doing my job, it's interesting to know what is that patient feeling after? What is it like? Like I said, it's 6 years coming in April, and still I have the fear of cancer coming back. At times I lay there on my bed, I'm thinking, wow, will it ever come back? Will it come back in another way? So the fear is always there. And it's just important for me as an individual to take charge of my life and fight for my life because my life is worth it. I really can go on, but I think it's time for me to stop now. And thank you all for the opportunity to tell my short story.
Jeff, thank you so much for everything that you have just shared. I think it's enormously brave of you. And I want to also say a big thank you for all the work that you've led to support other people who find themselves in the same position. I'd like to give Kerry and Hassan an opportunity to say anything they want to. I think there might be some questions. Would you be prepared to take questions?
For me?
Yeah.
Oh, by all means.
Okay. Well, can I ask, first of all, Kerry and Hassan, whether there's anything that they would like to add? Because they were Hassan, you were the surgeon that did Jeff's operation, and Kerry, I'm presuming you were involved in some of the support around it, but you can explain that for yourselves. Over to you.
So first of all, thank you, Jeff. I think one of the reasons why we're here is because certainly in my life, one does a successful operation and patients thankfully ultimately recover. You know, a lot of these issues are temporary and they get better. But it's not the final goal, it's the journey that is the challenge, and unfortunately, I think that can be extremely challenging for so many men. We were talking earlier, and a couple of things. When I moved to George's in 2017, we used to have an informal database of patients. So it was a spreadsheet saved on a drive where whenever someone got diagnosed with prostate cancer, we could very conveniently seek their permission and match pair them to someone of a similar demographic and a similar age. Because a lot of the information I found that was out there was aimed at a very certain demographic. Black men have a double risk of getting diagnosed with prostate cancer. That wasn't factored. Nothing was factored about gay men, so it was all very based around a certain demographic. Unfortunately, when GDPR came in, we had to delete that database because we hadn't sought formal consent of patients. So, and that's where the voice comes in, because we give information, and it's absolutely heartbreaking to hear that, beyond a successful operation, pending your journey of recovery, what a horrible, horrible time you've had. And a couple of things, and please don't think that this can't be justified. And what you're doing is invaluable. This is something as a hospital, we would really struggle, because what you're doing is much beyond what we do. Some of the things that we have, hearing a lot of stories such as Jeff's, at diagnosis, I think some of these things used to be approached, and we used to do a health needs assessment at the time of diagnosis. And one thing that we did, and now we do very formally, so Kerry and Sophia, once we've had a diagnosis and patients get the information, they will formally have an appointment the next week to check in and actually have a much more detailed discussion, because as you said, it's all white noise. So it's shock. People don't recognize, and as guys, we often just put up a brave face and say, I'll be fine. So I think at the diagnosis, that's something that we try to do in a very formal way, not immediately and afterwards. And also, I think from a survivorship perspective, and you've been in the system, there are 3 things that we will always talk about medically, which was cancer control, continence, and potency. But traditionally, we never asked people, how are you doing? So in that appointment, and that's also something that we are very, very, very passionate about. And certainly, that's why part of our sort of process now is very formal about asking people how they feel. Thank you once again for that. And it's been a pleasure to hear your story. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Hassan. Kerry.
Also, we've got a CAPS team at St George's, which you're probably familiar with, which we're linking in with a lot more now. I know back when you were diagnosed through the COVID times, all of that unfortunately stopped working and wasn't going ahead. So all of our cancer nurse specialists have level 2 psychological training so that we can better address more of the psychological and emotional needs of patients. And if we feel that it's not something that we can manage, then we refer on to the CAPS team, which is the psychological support team, and they're able to provide kind of cognitive behavioural therapy and one-to-one sessions and emotional and psychological support. So yeah.
So in summary, there's a better offer now, and because of the work that Jeff's done with some of the people he described, there's this very vibrant voluntary organisation that also provides peer support to people. So you're describing a historical situation which sounds truly awful, but is now in a much better place, and that's a nice uplifting note, I think. But I know there will be colleagues who, as I said earlier, will want to ask questions, if you don't mind. So can I just give board members that opportunity? And who'd like to go first? Richard? Would you say who you are for the benefit of those who don't know?
Thank you. So I'm Richard Jennings. I'm the Group Chief Medical Officer. I'm a physician by background, not a surgeon. Jeff, thank you so much for telling your story. I don't know if you were conscious of this, but we've had a long morning, and I think our attention levels just start to fade away towards lunchtime, and the whole board just went completely quiet and attentive as soon as you started talking. I don't know if you felt that. I felt it in the room. And I wanted to echo Gillian's thanks for you telling us your story. I just wanted to ask, it's 6 years ago, the 3 of you seem to be in touch with each other. You've come together today. Have you got some working arrangement between you? And Jeff, do you feel that our service now engages better to look after people who are in the same position as you were, to try and help them through the terrible period that you described so clearly?
To be honest, here in Kerry, a lot of men don't know that this is available for them, especially within the black community, and majority of men that I speak to are from the black community, and they still have a stigma of fear and mistrust. Yeah. So with myself, if I say to them jump, they don't say how high, they just jump. Yeah, because they believe in themselves, because I've been there and I've been through certain experiences. I know what I'm talking about, but I don't. I'm not clinically trained. I'm going from lived experience. So I had a psychological, person that was appointed to me, but it was the wrong person that was appointed to me. Yeah, because, I remember, when we had a conversation, she said something to me at the time that I thought, that doesn't make any sense. I'm a man. I'm not going to know what it's like for a woman to be experiencing certain things. So having the right type of support, you've got to be able to understand the culture, the language, and the behavior of the people that you're, speaking to or trying to help. So this, to be honest, it's just news to me now to know that this service is available. It's fantastic, but more need to know about it in order for, things to get better.
Thank you, Jeff. Kate, I think, did you indicate as well? And then Andrew.
I did, yeah, thank you. And Jeff, thank you very much for telling us your story. And I think this is a really good example of something really good that's come out of something really bad and challenging. And I just wondered, just picking up on what you've just said, that the real benefit of somebody who's been through the experience, you're a black man, you've been through the experience, and you will draw people in a way that, in a way you've said it, that sometimes the services we offer are not adequate to do that. And how do we, I guess there's an enormous amount of learning from what you've been through and what you've created that we need to think about how does the NHS have a role in that, or do we support people to do what you do, because no one could do it better than you, because you've been through the experience. You will have, people will trust you because you've had that experience, and then clearly if you've got thousands of people trusting and coming into a position where they're willing to talk about their own experience, I just think it's fantastic. So I guess it's something about how we think about that as well, and thank you for doing what you're doing, but I'm sure there's an opportunity to replicate that in other areas.
Can I just quickly say, what I think, what it is, it's not one size fits all. And that's what we need to all remember.
For me, there's so much that you said to us, Jeff, but the telling point just now when you said you didn't know about what we were doing, and the questions that leaves us with as a trust and as a trust board, I think are quite profound. But Andrew, you wanted to come in.
Sure, thank you. Hi, I'm Andrew Murray. I'm one of the non-executive directors at St George's and Epsom St Helier. It was just such a powerful story, so thank you for that. I think my question is more to Kerry and Hassan, though, around it raises so many questions for us, and I guess specifically with urology, it leads me to the question, how well do we measure the outcome for patients? So we're measuring the number of operations we've done and the success from that metric, but how well are we capturing the broad range of outcomes for a patient, including their emotional well-being, and how well are we linking in with patient and community groups, because that seems really fundamental. And I'm asking that question, but we could ask that question ourselves of all our cancer services, because I'm sure it's applicable across a range of different specialties.
So first of all, I think in terms of what we do, you're absolutely right. Traditionally, so I'll tell you, there's a study called True North, which looked at outcomes in terms of cancer control, continence, and potency. And we are by far the best centre in London in terms of surgical outcomes. But they were crude parameters which benchmark us against the rest of London and the country in terms of our ultimate technical ability to get men over these areas. We also have these crude benchmarking figures, which is of course behind time, which is National Prostate Cancer Experience Surveys and so on, in which we do very well. But traditionally, the answer is no. We haven't been asking the questions in terms of psychology. it was a bit of a chicken-egg situation, because what do we do with that information, ultimately? And this is without me trying to pass the buck, but what I will say is that what Jeff is doing is far, far, far beyond what we can offer in the National Health Service. Because ultimately, we can ask medicalized questions, refer patients to CAMS, and as you said, ultimately, the lady who saw you was probably a psychologist, but she wasn't a member of your tribe. She wasn't someone who'd had that experience. She wasn't part of your, the family of people who came together ultimately to help you. And I think that's really important, that, we need to find a like-minded group of people with the shared experience who become part of our family, the clan that you work with afterwards. And that's something that, and one of the reasons I think this is invaluable is because it gives us hope, and it tells us where we can then signpost our patients. Because in as much as we would love to have, a group of 2,000 patients, but ultimately that's not something that we would do. And I think what is absolutely imperative is that we find the Jeffs of this world and really latch on tightly and make sure that beyond our initial care, we are working very closely with people like yourself. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there's something about how society supports groups like Jeff, recognising all the points that you just made about there is a limit to what the NHS can properly do. Kerry, was there anything you wanted to add before Jacqueline wants to come in to ask Jeff a question? And then I'm probably going to have to close it down because we've got another meeting this afternoon, and I'm conscious I've already taken a lot of your time. So Kerry, was there anything to add?
Just on the support, kind of psychological support and other emotional supports, we now have a specific prostate cancer Macmillan support worker in post, which is new, and he works really closely with community support groups. So it'd be great to kind of link in with him as well. He's kind of focused on within the Macmillan Centre, so he sees patients coming in who've not necessarily just been diagnosed in clinic, but he's available to be seen. Patients just walking through the hospital, if they're visiting family members, he's down there available, and he works very closely with us. So that's also been a huge improvement to the service.
Yeah, so we've certainly got better, but there's some, as this discussion showed, there's still some way to go. Right, Jacqueline, closing question.
So thank you very, very much, Jeff, and Richard was right. We were all silent and listening, and that's not normal. So
it is. I don't like people talking across people.
But it was a really, I suppose, spellbinding in terms of the way that you described and wove the story, your story, and then how it came to an end, or it's not even at an end, but it came to a place where actually there felt like there was more hope, and there'd been a lot more support around that. I'm a member of a charity, a very small one, for a particular chest condition. I'm a trustee. I do it voluntary, and I can't give it enough time. But I just wondered but I have a support of some other trustees that we work together, because we all work, to try and make, more information. The whole bit of the charity is a bit like yours. It's to give patients information and support, both at the point of diagnosis and at what, as they go through what is a long-term condition, really. And I'm wondering what support you get, and what help you get to do what you're doing.
Okay, for one, if we're talking about support as in financially, I don't get any. I do all of this on my own, okay? I am still on what they call universal credit. So every time I take a little bit of money from there, and I will put it into what I believe. I also run a prostate cancer gym for those men who once used to go to the gym, but are afraid now because they're wearing pads and their incontinence and so on. So, I formulate a specific type of exercise for them to help develop their pelvic muscles, And not just that, it's just a cunning way of me putting men together in a community where they find like-minded people, they make friends, and they support each other. So with that, sometimes they will, send little donations and so on. And every penny I get goes right back into supporting what I do.
Well, thank you. So, Jeff, I think it's quite difficult to sum up the board's thanks. It seems a bit inadequate. I think Jacqueline and Richard both described how we listened and wondered, how we could respond in a way that you deserved, really. And I think I used the words brave. I thought it was enormously brave, but you did end on a note of hope. And I think the fact that colleagues from the hospital, Hassan and Kerry, have described that we have made progress as a trust, and the fact that together we've all been able to share that story, I think I think is helpful, and I hope we can build on that. But I did want to finish with an enormous thank you to you, and I would like everybody in the room to join with me in thanking you for all that you've done, for all that you continue to do for people in the same position that you've been in, but most of all to thank you for the honesty and frankness with which you've come to our meeting and helped us be a better board, I hope, a more listening and thoughtful board. I'm immensely grateful. You are allowed the final word.
Yeah, my final words now is, you could stop now, you're going to make me cry.
Well, that'll be both of us. So one of the governors has indicated he's still got a question to go. So I'm just going to take a minute to let our visitors depart. And then Julian, who's one of our governors, has got a final question, and then we will break.
Julian, could I just say very quickly, perhaps it would be possible, I'm assuming this is a charity, to have some details of the charity, because I'm sure that I would be interested in making a donation, and perhaps colleagues would too.
Can you provide us with that, Jeff?
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, most definitely. I can do that. I actually do have a website, okay, called Cancer Don't Let It Win, and it has a donation button there that, you could, make a donation, no matter how big or small. It's appreciated.
And I'd like a conversation separately about trying to get some recognition for your charity because of some stuff I do in another part of my life. So perhaps we can get in touch.
I know I've been hearing the word charity. I've not turned into a charity as yet. I'm a CIC, community interest organization, yeah? So we're a non-profit organization. So every penny I get goes into the business and goes right back out into the community.
Yeah, I think probably we understand that, but thanks for the clarification. Okay, couple of minutes, and then quickly back to deal with Julian's question, and then we break for lunch. Thank you. Colleagues, we've decided to go straight to lunch because most of you have already done that.